Love is a wonderful feeling, the inspiration behind countless books, songs, and films. But when love is twisted into obsession, it can transform into a force of destruction, leaving nothing but pain in its wake. Few stories illustrate this more tragically than that of Gladys Ricart. Her wedding day, which was supposed to be the happiest day of her life, turned into a horrible event. In 1959, in the Dominican Republic, Gladys Ricart was born into a modest family. By the age of 20, she had become a single mother after her youthful love affair ended unsuccessfully. Her sister, Norma, had moved to the United States, and Gladys longed to join her in hopes of building a brighter future. She worked tirelessly, saving every penny, sacrificing her own comfort in order to achieve that dream. Eventually, her perseverance paid off. Gladys immigrated to the United States and began a new chapter of her life, living with Norma's family in Manhattan, New York. At first, she could not afford to bring her young son, Ricardo, with her. He stayed behind in the Dominican Republic, cared for by relatives. Determined to reunite with him, Gladys immediately began learning English after her arrival and found steady employment. She worked hard, setting aside her earnings until she could finally bring Ricardo to the United States. In 1983, her determination bore fruit. She was delighted to be reunited with her 4-year-old son. After their reunion, Gladys enrolled in college, knowing that education was the key to securing better opportunities. She applied herself diligently and earned a degree in economics. Her persistence and discipline quickly made her a highly valued employee. Her career continued to soar. In time, she rose to the position of chief accountant at a large travel agency in Manhattan. Gladys did not fit the common stereotype of an immigrant struggling to survive. She mastered English, obtained a degree, climbed the career ladder, and even saved enough money to purchase her own apartment. By nearly every measure, she was living the American dream. All that remained was to build a family and find true love. But in matters of the heart, Gladys was cautious. Outwardly, it seemed as though she put her career above relationships or marriage. In reality, she longed to meet her soulmate. By 1992, after a decade in the U.S., her daily routine was predictable, taking the subway to work in the morning and returning to her sister's home in the evening. It was during one of these ordinary commutes that she met a man named Agustin Garcia. Agustin was a prominent figure in New York's Dominican community, a respected leader who, by the age of 40, had already established a successful career. Like Gladys, he had immigrated from the Dominican Republic and worked his way up from humble beginnings. By the time they met, he owned several small businesses and was raising 2 children from his previous marriage, both of whom lived with him in a large home. Within the Dominican community, Agustin was seen as a pillar of strength, a reliable man who was always ready to help others. He understood the struggles of starting over in a new country and devoted himself to assisting newcomers. He served as the director of the Dominican Chamber of Commerce in New York and was active in several other organizations tied to his homeland. He was more than just a member of these groups. He was deeply involved in community projects. His initiatives even led to the establishment of kindergartens and schools, which cemented his reputation as a respected and influential figure. To many, Agustin seemed like a perfect match for Gladys. She admired his confidence and the way he carried himself. He was charming, polite, and sociable, traits that immediately caught her attention. Their meeting was almost a twist of fate. Agustin rarely took the subway, but on that particular day, his car had broken down, forcing him to ride public transit. The successful businessman was captivated the moment he saw Gladys. He struck up a conversation, and the two spent the ride talking, eventually exchanging phone numbers with plans to meet again. Their romance blossomed quickly. Agustin courted Gladys with fine dinners, thoughtful gestures, and expensive gifts, sweeping her into what seemed like a dream relationship. Gladys's family was delighted when they learned about her new boyfriend. To them, he seemed like a suitable partner and a potential father figure for her son. After dating for some time, Augustin decided it was time to take their relationship to the next level and invited her to move in with him. Gladys, eager to embrace this new chapter, happily accepted. She confided in her loved ones that her greatest dream was to marry him. She longed for a proposal and imagined building a family together, raising 3 children by his side. At 33, Gladys finally moved into his home. Yet almost immediately, problems began to surface. Her son, Ricardo, struggled to get along with Augustin's children. Despite his efforts, and his mother's pleas for him to be patient, the hostility never eased. Augustin's children were dismissive and unkind, refusing to accept Ricardo. The tension in the household only grew worse. Augustin, rather than mediating fairly, consistently sided with his children, even when they were clearly at fault. This drove a painful wedge between him and Gladys. After enduring 2 years of constant arguments and emotional strain, Gladys realized she could no longer put her son through such turmoil. She told Augustin that living together was no longer possible. Surprisingly, he agreed, but instead of ending the relationship completely, he helped her find a new home, a spacious 2-story house only 9 minutes away from his. Es pared, no expense, as though trying to hold on to her. Their relationship continued, and Augustin visited her regularly. By then, Gladys's family and friends had grown so accustomed to him that they treated him as one of their own. In social settings, Augustin even introduced Gladys as his wife. Still, their relationship was never formalized. Gladys often tried to persuade him to marry her, but Augustin firmly refused. Citing the failure of his previous marriage, he claimed he no longer saw the point of legal marriage or having more children, dismissing it as nothing but bureaucracy. Over time, cracks in the relationship became more visible. According to her family, Gladys's joy began to fade as Augustin's darker side emerged. He was unfaithful, engaging in affairs, and increasingly controlling. Gladys knew about his betrayals, but she remained silent for a long time, choosing to avoid confrontation. Her silence, however, only worsened the situation. One heated argument marked a breaking point. Augustin pulled out a gun and chased her. Terrified, Gladys managed to lock herself in a room until the danger passed. From that moment on, she knew she had to end things for good. Yet fear of his manipulation kept her cautious. She wanted irrefutable proof, something that would leave him no reason to argue. Catching him in the act of infidelity seemed the clearest way out. That moment came in the fall of 1998. Gladys went to Augustin's office and found him with another woman. It was all she needed. She broke up with him immediately, moved out, and made sure to inform his family, friends, that the relationship was over. But Augustin refused to let go. He saw Gladys as his possession, a woman he had owned for 7 years. He bombarded her with phone calls and left gifts at her doorstep. Bouquets of flowers, even a Bible. To Gladys, these were pitiful attempts to win her back. But to her family, the gifts carried darker, symbolic undertones. Regardless of his persistence, Gladys remained firm. There would be no reconciliation. Months later, Gladys's life took a brighter turn. During a lunch break at a restaurant, she met James Preston Jr., an accountant who also played music on the side. Their connection was instant. After just a few dates, they became inseparable. Within 2 months, they spent nearly all their free time together. Soon, they set a wedding date, September 26, 1999. The news filled Gladys's family with joy. At last, her long-cherished dream of a wedding and a white gown was about to come true. She immersed herself in the blissful preparations, unaware that Augustin, consumed by jealousy and obsession, was lurking in the shadows. Almost every night, he parked near her house, watching her for hours. Unable, or perhaps unwilling, to let her go. On August 12, 1999, just 6 weeks before the wedding, Gladys and her fiancé were enjoying a quiet evening at her home when Augustin suddenly appeared at the door. At first, he spoke calmly, asking to see Gladys, but she refused. His composure quickly crumbled. He began shouting angrily and hurling stones at her windows. Alarmed, Gladys called the police. Augustin was arrested that night, yet she chose not to press charges, not wanting to complicate matters or disrupt her wedding plans. It was a decision she could not have known would prove fatal. On September 24, only 2 days before the ceremony, Gladys went shopping for supplies for her bridesmaids. To her dismay, Augustin had been following her. He approached her inside the supermarket, hugging her as if they were still a couple. Gladys did not resist, afraid that any confrontation might provoke him further. They exchanged a few words, and that evening she told James and her family what had happened. His behavior unsettled her. She admitted she felt anxious, but she still did not grasp the full danger he posed. Then the long-awaited day, September 26, 1999, arrived. Gladys was radiant, surrounded by family and friends at home, preparing for the ceremony. She dressed in her gown, had her hair styled, and her makeup perfectly applied. The bride was glowing with joy. The groom was already waiting for her at the church. Photographs and home video from that morning would later become haunting evidence, capturing her final moments alive. But before Gladys could leave for the ceremony, Augustin forced his way in. He pulled a .38 caliber revolver from his briefcase and, without hesitation, fired 3 shots at close range. The first bullet struck her body, the second pierced her spine, and the third entered her head. She collapsed instantly. By the time paramedics arrived, there was nothing they could do. Gladys Ricart's dream of walking down the aisle in her white dress was stolen forever. Augustin was detained at the scene without resistance. At the police station, he began to speak with investigators. He claimed that he had been driving toward his home in Manhattan that morning and decided, as he often did, to pass by Gladys's house. He insisted it was out of sentiment, not surveillance. But when he arrived, he was surprised to see a crowd of people in formal attire and limousines gathered outside. He said he did not realize his ex was getting married that very day. Shocked, he circled the block several times before finally stopping across the street. There, Gladys's younger brother, Juan, approached him. Already suspicious of Augustin's intentions, Juan urged him to leave, fearing he might cause trouble. Augustin, however, told him he had been invited, concealing his true emotions. Without further resistance, he entered the house. No one challenged him when he walked inside. At first, Augustin claimed he could not remember what happened next, as though he had blacked out. Later, under questioning, he admitted he always carried a gun and had brought it into the house. Eventually, he confessed to pulling the trigger. But when asked why he would kill an unarmed woman on her wedding day, he offered no clear explanation. The following day, Augustin Garcia was brought to court for his preliminary hearing, where he faced formal charges of first-degree murder. Bail was set at $5 million, a sum reflecting not only the severity of the crime but also the threat he posed to the community. Once celebrated as a successful and respected figure in the Dominican-American community, his reputation collapsed overnight. The murder shocked the nation, quickly became a high-profile case. Media outlets covered every detail, filling newspapers and television broadcasts. The brutality of this act, the murder of a bride on her wedding day, attracted public attention. Prominent defense attorneys soon vied for the chance to represent him. Drawn by the notoriety of the case and the promise of making their names through one of the most infamous murder trials of the decade, Augustin Garcia's trial was scheduled for September 11, 2001. This gave the defense nearly 2 years to prepare their case and carefully craft a favorable image of their client. From the start, the defense attorneys actively engaged with the media, holding press conferences, and speaking to the public. Their strategy was to shift public opinion, portraying Augustine as the real victim. The first tactic was to accuse Gladys's brother Juan and her son Ricardo of assault. They argued that Augustine never intended to kill his former fiancée, that the shooting was an accident that happened while he was defending himself from an attack by both men at once. The defense also attempted to discredit Gladys. They alleged that both she and Augustine had been unfaithful, each involved in multiple affairs. According to them, Gladys was secretly preparing to marry another man while pretending to reconcile with Augustine. Overcome with shock and heartbreak, he suffered an emotional breakdown upon discovering the wedding. They even claimed that just the day before, the couple had been walking hand in hand in the supermarket. Yet at the wedding, Juan suddenly attacked him, sparking the fatal gunfire. The lawyers framed the incident as a crime of passion, which under state law would qualify as manslaughter rather than murder. A manslaughter conviction carried a sentence of only 5 to 10 years, far less than life imprisonment. Augustine's public reputation also worked in his favor. He was widely respected in New York's Latino community as a generous and compassionate man. As fabricated stories spread that Gladys had been unfaithful, public opinion toward her began to sour. Shockingly, some even suggested she had brought it on herself. This was devastating for the Ricart family. They realized how much harm the defense's media campaign was doing to Gladys's memory. Determined to fight back, they attended every press conference, speaking out to protect her name. They insisted the rumors of infidelity were false. The relationship between Gladys and Augustine, they explained, had ended long ago. It was Augustine who continued to obsess over her, behaving inappropriately and stalking her. Gladys had been too compassionate to press charges against him before, but he had shown no such compassion in return. When the case reached court, the judge eventually banned lawyers from holding press conferences and giving interviews. But by then, the damage was already done. The victim's reputation had been deeply tarnished, weakening the prosecution's case. Still, the defense continued to depict Augustine as the victim, Gladys as unfaithful and reckless. The prosecution even had one powerful weapon. The murder had been caught on film. The camera had been recording the preparations for the wedding, unknowingly to Augustine, captured the shooting itself. When hearings began, only the judge was permitted to view the tape. The defense fought fiercely to keep the footage away from the jury, calling it prejudicial. After long debates, the court ruled that only a 15-second clip, the exact moment of the shooting, could be shown in court. Prosecutors worried this short segment would not have enough context to fully sway the jury, and feared the defense would use that limitation to twist the narrative. Sticking to their strategy, the defense claimed the fatal shots were fired accidentally during a struggle with Juan and Ricardo. They painted Gladys as the cause of the tragedy, citing her so-called immoral lifestyle. They even produced witnesses, including a neighbor and his daughter, who testified that they had seen Gladys at Augustine's home only days before the shooting. The witnesses claimed the couple seemed to still be together, though in reality Gladys had only gone to retrieve her belongings. Through such manipulations, the defense succeeded in earning at least some sympathy from the jury. Fortunately, the prosecution had a strong response, mainly based on the video recordings. These were undeniably sad images in which Augustine took the life of Gladys in front of her family members, including her son. It was obvious that he was not defending himself. After all the bullets fired hit the victim. The prosecution began to point out other obvious flaws in the defense's version. In particular, the 15-second recording offered no evidence that Augustine was attacked after entering Gladys's house. No one even approached him. Despite this, Augustine took out a weapon and opened fire. In addition, he made no attempt to defend himself, as the barrel of the loaded pistol was initially, and until the last second, aimed directly at Gladys. The attack was clearly a premeditated act, motivated by jealousy. Not only was the pistol full of bullets, but he also brought spares. Apparently, in case a full cylinder wasn't enough for the execution, the lawyers had their own answers to that. They argued that he was a well-known businessman, a wealthy man who could have had his own enemies. So he always carried a loaded weapon for self-defense. The prosecutor's office also tried to refute the defense's portrayal of Gladys as dissolute. There was ample evidence that after the breakup, Augustin had engaged in a prolonged campaign of harassment and stalking. Everyone close to Gladys reported this. Even his own son feared him, knowing how cruel he could be. His kindness and selflessness were merely a mask that hid the true face of the criminal. The surveillance and unpredictable visits by Augustin continued for at least the last few months. Investigators also found a notebook in Augustin's car listing license plate numbers of vehicles parked near Gladys's home. He didn't just spy on Gladys. He kept a detailed record of every person who frequented her area, likely to distinguish the neighbors' cars from that of Gladys's future husband. While the debate was ongoing, Augustin suddenly made a controversial decision. He chose to speak on his own behalf before the jury. This decision significantly influenced the subsequent verdict. It's worth noting that, in legal practice, such an action can be entirely legitimate or a desperate gamble for the accused. In October, the prosecution asked him to recount the incident in the house. They expected him to reiterate the lawyer's version of events, claiming he had entered a state of diminished capacity and lost control. However, Augustin claimed he felt calm when he saw Gladys in her wedding dress, accusing James and Ricardo of attacking him. This argument had already been refuted after the video recording was reviewed. Simultaneously, Augustin maintained that he truly experienced a break from reality and couldn't recall how he fired the pistol, claiming it was out of luck. Respond. The prosecution argued that nothing in his words aligned with a state of diminished capacity. Throughout his testimony, the defendant attempted to show remorse, even crying, but his display seemed unconvincing after the interview. On February 1, 2002, Gladys's family awaited the final decision after a lengthy hearing. The jury deliberated and ultimately found Augustin Garcia guilty of premeditated murder. He was sentenced to life in prison, but will be eligible for parole after serving 30 years. Gladys was buried in her hometown of Tambar in the Dominican Republic. Her body was sent home a week after her death. She was buried in her wedding dress. A year after her death, Florida resident named Gladys put on a wedding dress and ran a marathon. After she gave an interview, she stated that it was done in memory of Gladys Ricart's death. In the name of combating domestic violence, several communities still hold annual marches across the states. Unfortunately, this has not led to a significant reduction in the severity of the problem. Following the trials, Augustin refused to speak publicly and offered no comments. The reporter learned that from the very beginning of his imprisonment, he turned to the gospel and began preaching among criminals. While his lawyers lobbied for a reduced sentence, several appeals were rejected. Augustin remains in prison and will be eligible for parole in 2029. Welcome back to our channel. Today we will explore a new case. The case of Robin Doan. This story takes place on a remote farm in a small town called Pampa in Texas, USA. 10-year-old Robin Doan was the daughter of Michelle Conrad. She lived with Michelle, her stepfather, Brian Conrad, and her older brother Zach. The family owned a farmhouse in the area, where Brian successfully managed a farming business. The children were raised in a peaceful rural environment. After divorcing the children's biological father, Michelle met Brian, a kind and pleasant man who quickly formed a strong bond with her children. Life improved for Michelle, and she eventually married Brian. The family had been living happily together for several years. By September 2005, Michelle was 6 months pregnant, and the whole family was eagerly anticipating the arrival of the baby. Brian, in particular, was thrilled at the thought of becoming a father. Meanwhile, Robin, a determined and resourceful 10-year-old, was living the typical life of a schoolgirl. She shared close relationships with her mother, brother, stepfather, and even her biological father, who occasionally visited her. Robin also spent some summers with her biological dad. On the evening of September 30, 2005, Robin went to bed as usual, but was suddenly awakened in the middle of the night. At first, she thought she was trapped in a nightmare when she heard her mother screaming and the explosion. It quickly became clear that this was no dream. Something terrible was happening downstairs. Overcome with fear but driven by curiosity, Robin got out of bed and moved to her bedroom door to listen. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed down the hallway, stopping right outside her room. The door creaked open, and Robin quickly leapt back into her bed, her heart racing. She lay perfectly still, trying to suppress her rising fear. Suddenly, the explosion shattered the silence. 2 bullets narrowly missed her, one passing just inches from her left leg and another near the left arm. The third bullet hit a nearby piece of furniture. In the darkness, the attacker didn't realize they had missed her. They then moved to the next room, where Robin's brother, Zach, was asleep. Moments later, more explosions echoed through the house, followed by a faint, heartbreaking cry from Zach. Then, everything fell eerily silent as the attacker left. Robin was frozen with fear, her body paralyzed. She pretended to be dead, using every ounce of willpower to stay perfectly still, too terrified even to breathe deeply, terrified that the attacker might return, notice her alive. In 2.5 hours of panic, she remained in that state, unable to process what had just happened. When she finally managed to summon the courage to move, there were no signs of the intruder. Summoning her strength, Robin cautiously got up. She grabbed her phone and called 911, though every step and movement was filled with dread that the assailant might still be nearby. Her voice trembling, Robin identified herself as a scared 10-year-old girl seeking help. Through tears, she told the operator she was cold and frightened. Between sobs, she explained that she had heard her mother screaming an explosion, but had been too afraid to leave her room to check on her family. She feared the worst, knowing hours had passed without any sound or sign of life from her loved ones. Robin eventually went to the kitchen and gazed out the window, anxiously waiting for the police to arrive. As soon as she saw the flashing lights of the patrol cars, she rushed outside to meet the officers. The little girl, visibly shaken and distressed, was escorted to one of the patrol cars for her safety. Meanwhile, several officers prepared to investigate the house, anticipating the possibility that the attacker might still be inside and ready to confront them. Inside the house, the police discovered a horrifying crime scene. The entire family had been brutally murdered. Brian had been attacked 3 times, Michelle 6 times, and even the family dog had been attacked twice. Robin's brother Zach was killed in his sleep, and one of the bullets struck him directly in the head. Michelle, who was just 2 months away from giving birth, was also tragically killed, and her unborn baby did not survive. Shell casings found at the scene matched a rifle, which was typically purchased through special orders or produced in limited quantities. Throughout this time, Robin remained in the patrol car, waiting for news about her family. She held onto a thin hope that someone had survived. When an officer returned and confirmed that the perpetrator had fled the scene, Robin felt a brief moment of relief. However, the devastating truth about her family's fate was soon revealed to her. Robin began crying again as she fully grasped that her loved ones had been killed. The police informed her that she needed to go to the station to speak with detectives. However, before leaving, Robin asked the officers to help her feed the animals so she could try to calm herself. During this time, she appeared detached from reality. While feeding her goats in the barn, she spoke as though nothing had happened, reminiscing about how she and her brother had won prizes in a competition. But then, she suddenly broke down again, crying as she grabbed one of the officers by the shoulder and desperately asked when her loved ones would come out of the house. The officer had to gently remind her once more that she was the only survivor of the tragedy. Robin was first taken to a nearby medical center for care. The psychologists were assigned to work with her, but this would take time. Doctors examined Robin and confirmed that she was physically unharmed. As a result, the police brought her to the station both to speak with her and to ensure her safety. Meanwhile, detectives understood they were dealing with a dangerous criminal and needed to act quickly to prevent another attack. Robin cooperated with the detectives and provided information to the best of her ability. However, Robin did not witness the events firsthand. Detectives initially suspected that her stepfather or mother might have had a serious conflict with someone shortly before the incident, but this theory was ruled out. Robin denied any such conflicts. Another possibility emerged, that someone in her family might have been involved with dangerous individuals or illegal substances, but Robin dismissed this as well. She couldn't think of anyone who might hate her family enough to attack them with a weapon. Although she described what she heard in great detail, she couldn't identify the attacker. She hadn't gotten a clear look, only catching a glimpse of a dark silhouette. As a result, she was unable to provide any useful description. The only thing she was certain of was that the attacker had light skin. One critical piece of information did stand out. Robin distinctly remembered hearing 15 explosions and confidently reported this number. She later revised her statement slightly, noting that there were clearly more than 10 explosions. When the crime scene was examined, investigators found shell casings confirming that exactly 15 explosions were fired. It seemed surprising that a 10-year-old girl, especially under such terrifying circumstances, could recall this detail so accurately. The situation remained unclear. No motive for the attack had been established, nor had the perpetrator's intentions. It was possible the attacker wanted to eliminate everyone in the household and leave no loose ends. There was even a risk that they might return to target Robin, the sole witness, to complete their plan. For Robin's safety, she will be placed in a specialized center for victims of violence. There, Robin was under the care of her biological father, stepmother, and stepsister, with police officers also stationed at the facility. Now, her father was the only person able to support and help her. He arrived in the middle of the night to pick Robin up, and after her interrogation was completed, they were immediately escorted to the center. Robin was informed that these precautions were necessary for her protection, and she was not allowed to leave the facility. She understood this, as she also herself feared another attack. Despite the restriction on leaving, Robin had to attend her family's funeral. She was allowed to go, but only under police escort. The funeral drew a large crowd from the nearby town, as many people knew the family and spoke about them fondly. In this small agricultural town in Texas, everyone was deeply saddened by the tragedy. For Robin and the mourners, the sight of the 3 coffins at the memorial was unbearable. No one could have imagined that these kind people could die so tragically. Detectives saw the funeral as an opportunity. The time and location of the service were not kept secret. In fact, the police hoped the attacker might show up. If the perpetrator planned to strike again, the funeral would have been the perfect moment. Law enforcement was fully prepared to act, closely monitoring the crowd while keeping a watchful eye on Robin, who was accompanied by her father, stepmother, and stepsister. But the event passed without any suspicious activity. By this point, forensic experts had finished examining the crime scene. They uncovered evidence that might assist in identifying the perpetrator, but no solid leads pointed directly to the murderer. Still, the findings were notable. Inside the house, they found shoe prints, and outside, near the house, they discovered tire tracks. The experts collected all the prints and carefully analyzed the tire tread patterns. Unfortunately, No fingerprints or DNA belonging to the attacker were recovered. The lack of fingerprints led investigators to believe the attacker had worn gloves. The only blood found at the scene was that of the victims, suggesting the perpetrator was uninjured. It seemed the family was caught off guard and had no opportunity to resist or fight back. The back door of the house had been forced open, indicating a break-in. However, despite the presence of valuable items, including a wallet with cash, nothing was stolen from the home. Detectives determined that robbery was not the motive behind the attack. The assailant's behavior didn't match that of someone acting impulsively or under the influence of banned substances or alcohol. Instead, the killer acted with intention and precision, methodically eliminating the family members one by one. The police thoroughly investigated of Brian, Michelle, and Zach, but found no suspicions. No one had a motive, and everyone appeared to be kind, peaceful, and conflict-averse. Robin's biological father had been with his family in a nearby town, and his wife confirmed he was home asleep that night. Eventually, all leads came to a standstill, as no one in the family's circle seemed to fit the profile of a suspect. However, such a violent act targeting both adults and children suggested the possibility of a strong motive, such as jealousy, revenge, or resentment. The day before Robin's family was murdered, in the small town of Pineville, Missouri, relatives of the McCool family have attempted to contact them without success. By evening, worried relatives had arrived at the McCool family home. To their shock, the house was empty and surrounded by police tape. A neighbor informed them that a terrible crime had occurred. The night before, Orly McCool and Dawn McCool were killed by an unidentified attacker. At that time, forensic investigators were still processing the scene. They also questioned the relatives who arrived, but no one could provide any helpful information about a possible suspect. Inside the house, investigators found some unusual shell casings of an uncommon caliber, rare and difficult to obtain in the U.S. The following day, another incident in the same area provided a key lead. A local resident, Mr. King, returned to his home after being away for several days on a work trip. He discovered that his house had been broken into, his weapon safes had been forced open and emptied. Among the stolen items was a rare firearm in the U.S. along with ammunition. This strongly suggested a connection between the burglary and the murder of the McCool family. The assailant had likely stolen the weapon from King before committing the crime. Mr. King was thoroughly investigated, but he had a solid alibi. He was out of town at the time of the attack. However, several members of his family could have had access to the weapon. Among them, one person stood out: Levi King, the son of King. Levi was on the run, and family members suspected he was connected to the McCool murders. Thanks to Mr. King's report, detectives had a photo of the suspected killer. At just 20 years old, Levi was already well known to authorities due to his criminal history, which included serving time for burglary. A few years earlier, Levi had broken into a neighbor's house, stolen valuables, and set the property on fire. For this crime, he was sentenced to 4 years in prison. Just weeks earlier, Levi had been scheduled for transfer to another correctional facility. Desperate for freedom, he escaped during the transfer. Authorities in Missouri were certain Levi was extremely dangerous, armed, and ready to use his weapons at any time. Citizens were alerted through the media, and people were advised not to approach Levi if they encountered him, but to immediately contact law enforcement. Meanwhile, relatives of the McCool family reported several items stolen, including their Dodge Dakota pickup truck. The truck's details were entered into a police database, and a warrant was issued for Levi King's arrest in connection with the crime at the McCool residence. Although Levi King did not know any of the victims personally, he was on the run and needed resources, particularly a vehicle, to leave the state. Eventually, a suspicious young man was stopped by Border Patrol in El Paso, Texas, near the Mexican border, likely attempting to flee the country. During the stop, the young man calmly admitted to having a weapon in his trunk. This led to a more detailed search. During the investigation, they discovered that the pickup truck he was driving was the McCool family's stolen vehicle. Levi was taken to the police station for further investigation. Law enforcement officers decided to question Levi further, and from the start, his behavior seemed odd. Within just 15 minutes of talking to detectives, Levi confessed to the double murder of Orly and Dawn McCool. Levi admitted he couldn't explain why he committed the murders. He said he broke into a random house on the outskirts of town to steal a car, driven only by an overwhelming and uncontrollable desire to kill. When Levi entered the house, he was unexpectedly noticed. A door opened, and a woman appeared, politely asking what he wanted. Levi claimed he was startled and panicked, so he grabbed his weapon and attacked her. Hearing the noise, a man came to investigate, and Levi, paralyzed by fear, also attacked him. After the killings, Levi fled in the pickup truck. Levi was soon extradited to Missouri, where local law enforcement questioned him further. During the interrogation, Levi once again confessed to the murders. Levi made an even more shocking confession. He admitted to murdering the Robin family in Texas. His confession matched evidence from the crime scene of the Robin family's triple murder, including matching shell casings found at both crime scenes. Levi described how he had attacked defenseless members of the Robin family, and upon hearing noises upstairs, discovered others in the house. Among them was Robin, who awoke to the explosion. Driven by uncontrollable bloodlust, the killer showed no regard for the victims' ages. Levi went upstairs, entered the bedrooms, and attacked the occupants in their beds to eliminate any witnesses. After committing these horrific acts, Levi fled the scene. After Levi confessed to the crimes, the police quickly contacted their colleagues in Texas to verify the details he had provided. Once again, his account aligned with the evidence. With this confirmation, Robin was finally able to feel some relief. She had been under immense stress for days, unable to sleep. The next day, investigators from Texas arrived to take Levi into custody. During the transfer, showing no remorse, Levi openly described his emotional state before, during, and after the murders. He admitted that the feelings he experienced during the murders were more intense and pleasurable than any banned substance. Even hours after committing the killings, he claimed he could still smell gunpowder, which gave him a sense of euphoria. In a formal, video-recorded statement, he detailed his actions, starting with the murder of the McCool family. Levi explained that his urge to kill coincided with his need for a vehicle to escape toward the Mexican border. Along the way, he felt another uncontrollable desire to kill and randomly chose the isolated home of the Robin family as his next target. Levi admitted that he did not know any of his victims, including the McCools or the Robins. Realizing the severity of his crimes, he understood he was now facing the death penalty. In an attempt to avoid this, he fled toward Mexico, hoping to disappear. In Missouri, Levi was charged with the double murder of the McCool family. Following his lawyer's advice, he accepted a plea deal to avoid the death penalty and was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. At the same time, hearings for the triple murder and attempted murder in Texas were approaching. Unlike in Missouri, Texas prosecutors took a firmer stance, refusing to rule out the death penalty or consider any plea agreements from the defense. The prosecutor was confident in securing a conviction that would ensure Levi could no longer pose a threat to society. However, death penalty cases often involve lengthy trials and require extensive preparation. Levi spent several years in jail without bail while awaiting trial in Texas. By the time the trial began, Robin, the sole survivor of the Texas attack, was over 14 years old. The hearings took place just before her birthday. On the eve of her 15th birthday, Robin was furious as she realized how senseless and brutal Levi's attack on her family had been. He had no motive and acted purely out of a desire to kill. Understandably, she strongly advocated for him to receive the death penalty. However, Levi's lawyer fought to save his client from execution. Opinions were divided. Some believed Levi did not deserve to live, while others argued that life imprisonment without parole was a harsher and more fitting punishment for his crimes. The defense attorney sought to present Levi King as a more sympathetic figure to influence the jury's decision. He emphasized that Levi had struggled with bipolar disorder since adolescence. Over the years, he had also been diagnosed with depression, psychosis, and schizophrenia. Levi was one of 7 children in a family where he reportedly received little to no love or care. His antisocial behavior was linked to an abusive, alcoholic father and a neglectful, indifferent mother. From as early as elementary school, Levi engaged in troubling acts, including arson, substance abuse, and killing animals for amusement. These behaviors seemed to reflect the dysfunctional environment he grew up in. Levi's abusive father was the first to frequently harm him and expose him to alcohol and banned substances. When police visited Levi's home, they were shocked by what they found. One wall was covered with ceremonial knives, swords, and weapons. Strangely, despite often struggling to afford food, Levi always managed to buy ammunition and weapons. Levi's obsession with violence contradicted the defense's claim that he was a good person, shaped by an adverse childhood and environment. The prosecution painted a different picture, portraying Levi King as a predator waiting for his chance to strike. They described him as someone who took pleasure in the smell of blood and gunpowder. The prosecution's main witness was Robin, the sole survivor of Levi's attack. The trial was a deeply traumatic experience for her. She was determined to confront the man who had destroyed her family. Up until that moment, she had been filled with anger and wished for his death. Later, Robin shared her story with journalists. She explained that when she first looked into Levi's eyes in court, she was struck by how empty and cold he seemed. As she saw his lifeless eyes, she forgave him. Robin realized it was pointless to waste energy on someone so devoid of humanity. She understood that Levi could not have become any other kind of person. After about 8 hours of deliberation, the jury decided that the death penalty was too harsh for someone as mentally handicapped as he was. They sentenced Levi to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Levi was eventually extradited to Missouri to serve his life sentence there. For a long time after the attack on her family, Robin struggled with severe psychological trauma. She frequently had nightmares, couldn't sleep well, and was unable to go outside alone. Even years later, the effects of her trauma would resurface. However, thanks to the support of her loved ones, she was able to overcome them. The case of Robin Doan raises many questions about the influence of psychology and deviant behavior. Gaming addiction and the use of high doses of antidepressants may be closely related to a number of factors that cause the psychology of people facing stress or psychological disorders to become unstable, leading to violent behavior. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Raynella Dossett Leith. Raynella Dossett Leith was born on October 25, 1948 in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, a small isolated town originally established for workers at the nearby nuclear power plant. Her parents worked at the plant, and because the town was isolated, it was safer than many other American cities. Children were free to play outside. Raynella was a bright student and did well in school. She successfully enrolled at East Tennessee State University in Knoxville, where she studied nursing. There, she met a very ambitious young man named Ed Dossett, who aspired to become a corporate executive or start his own business, and even had political ambitions. He was a quiet, friendly young man, and they both grew up in rural Tennessee. In 1970, the young couple got married and moved to the suburbs of Knoxville. Ed Dossett owned a large old family farm that they renovated with the help of contractors, turning it into the perfect home. After graduating from college, Raynella began working as a nurse at a local hospital and worked her way up to the position of senior nurse. By 1975, she had completed her law degree and begun a successful legal career. In 1978, when the Knoxville County Attorney General retired, Ed Dossett ran for the position and was elected. Raynella played a major role in his success, as he credited much of it to her support. In 1978, the couple welcomed their first daughter. In 1983, they had a son, followed by another daughter in 1985. After learning that she was pregnant with her first child, Raynella decided to quit her job and become a full-time housewife, as her husband had a good income, and she also helped with the farm work. During this time, Ed Dossett served as the Knoxville County Attorney and worked with a secretary named Kay Clift Walker, with whom he had a secret affair. Although Kay had a family of her own, they still spent weekends and holidays together. When Kay became pregnant, she had to quit her job due to her increased responsibilities, but her intimate encounters with Ed Dossett continued. In such a conservative county, having an extramarital relationship was unacceptable for a public servant. Ed Dossett and Kay chose to end their affair to avoid damaging their reputations. However, the situation was more complicated than it seemed. Those who knew Raynella recognized her as a controlling and powerful person. People often did not enjoy interacting with her, let alone befriending her. Ed Dossett's close friends and family knew that his marital problems began soon after they got married, largely due to Raynella's desire to control every aspect of their lives. Many later understood why Ed Dossett decided to leave. During a meeting, Ed Dossett began to experience severe stomach pain. His assistant noticed that he was constantly holding his stomach and seemed unwell. When asked about his health, Ed Dossett expressed that he believed his wife was trying to harm him, implying that she was poisoning his food. However, when offered help, he insisted that he could handle it on his own. By September 1991, his condition had worsened to the point that he had to be hospitalized. Although he was skeptical of his wife's intentions, he later revealed that these fears were unfounded. Doctors performed a series of tests and discovered a malignant tumor in his small intestine and liver. Unfortunately, the cancer was already at an advanced stage, with metastases spreading to nearby organs in the abdominal cavity. Ed Dossett returned home anxiously and shared his diagnosis with Raynella. He later confided to family members that she responded calmly to the news but chose not to discuss the illness. She believed it was better to keep the situation private, thinking it would allow her husband to continue working for as long as possible. She felt that staying active would help prolong his life, and secretly hoped for a miracle that would aid in his recovery. Those who knew Raynella well speculated that her motives were financial, believing she pushed him to work until the end to maintain a steady income. By March 1992, Ed Dossett's health had declined significantly, and it was clear he was losing the battle against his illness. During this time, he wanted his family close, so he contacted loved ones, including his cousin, with whom he had a close relationship until the end of his life. The cousin lived in another state and drove over 700 kilometers to visit Ed Dossett. Raynella refused to let his cousin into the house, leaving him no choice but to leave. That evening, Raynella wrote a letter explaining her actions, claiming that Ed Dossett's serious condition made it impossible for him to receive visitors anymore, and that his appearance might scare them. However, No one found this explanation convincing. Just a few days later, Ed Dossett himself asked his family to visit him one last time, indicating that he did not care about his appearance. The next day, Raynella insisted that Ed Dossett return to work. Despite being in excruciating pain and barely able to move, Ed chose to follow his wife's wishes and continue working until the very end. After only one day of work, he was forced to stop. Now bedridden, Ed Dossett was on near-constant morphine to manage his unbearable pain, and doctors estimated he had only a few weeks to live. No one expected anything unusual to happen to Ed Dossett, who was in critical condition and required medical assistance to stay alive. On the morning of July 9, a 911 call was received requesting police and paramedics to Raynella's home for assistance. When the police arrived, they found Raynella in a panic, running around the body of Ed Dossett, who was lying on the ground. Raynella explained that her husband had gone out to check on their cattle. After a while, she heard noises indicating that the cattle were agitated. She tried to call out to Ed Dossett, but there was no response. Fearing he had been trampled by the frightened animals, she grabbed her pistol and fired several shots into the air to scare them away. Initially, the police believed the incident to be an accident. Raynella was taken to the police station for standard questioning. However, as the conversation progressed, her account of her husband's death began to raise suspicions. During the questioning, the police learned that Ed Dossett had a serious illness and had suddenly wanted to check on the cattle, which seemed odd given his poor health and difficulty walking. The police were puzzled as to why Raynella had allowed him to go alone to the herd in such a weakened state, and why she had shown no concern when he took so long to return. Raynella remained in the house until she heard a loud noise, at which point she discovered her husband lying on the ground. Ed Dossett had been trampled and was covered in scratches and hoof marks. Raynella administered first aid and CPR. Having worked in a hospital, she was well versed in these techniques, but unfortunately, nothing seemed to help. As her story unfolded, more bizarre details emerged. Realizing her husband was beyond saving, she called for emergency services, but there was no response. She tried to contact the local hospital directly, but she did not remember their phone number. The police found this suspicious, as she had worked as a senior nurse at a local health center for many years and should have known the number by heart. Despite the inconsistencies, her account was considered credible. She explained that she had not been working for the organization for long and had forgotten the necessary phone numbers. She also mentioned feeling scared and shocked. Eventually, she contacted the local market director, a friend of hers, and asked him to call for help. He then reached out to the emergency services. Unfortunately, the condition of the body made it difficult to determine the cause of death at first glance, so a thorough autopsy was required. Forensic experts arrived to investigate the scene, but they found no physical evidence. Ultimately, Ed Dossett's death was ruled an accident, and the case was closed. However, the real story was just beginning. Those who knew Ed Dossett well realized that in his final days, he was barely conscious for more than a few minutes due to constant pain and required injections of morphine to relieve it. It was strange that he suddenly decided to leave the house to check on the cows. If he tried to stand, he could barely do so on his own. His legs had weakened in the last days of his life. The medical examiner found numerous internal injuries and broken bones on the man. Furthermore, there were hoof marks on his skin, which corroborated Raynella's story. Ed Dossett's relatives knew that his life insurance policy included a clause that doubled the payout if he died in an accident rather than from natural causes such as cancer. Although his wife would still receive a payout, it would be significantly less. Therefore, it was in her best interest to present her husband's death as an accident. Since the authorities classified his death as an accident, she could collect double the compensation. This is why Raynella initially tried to hide her husband's illness from the police. Ed Dossett's relatives decided to investigate the circumstances surrounding his death. Discovering inconsistencies in the case, Ed Dossett's blood had almost no morphine, which was surprising given his regular use of high doses. He had terminal cancer and could only manage his pain with large amounts of painkillers. The forensic expert confirmed that the morphine level was 0, indicating that he had not taken any medication for at least a day. However, it seemed that Ed Dossett could not move without painkillers. Despite this, the official inquest was closed. It is believed that Ed Dossett may have staged his own death, as he was nearing the end of his life and wanted to go on his own terms. Perhaps he was worried about his family and considered this his last wish. But it is difficult to understand why he did not at least take a painkiller to alleviate his suffering before staging this incident. All of this creates a confusing picture with contradictory details. At the funeral, Ed Dossett's friends confirmed their suspicions about Raynella. Eyewitnesses noted that she seemed carefree and even cheerful, which was surprising for a grieving widow. Rather than mourning her husband, she appeared to treat the event as a social gathering, mingling and chatting with guests. This behavior was especially strange given her usual rudeness toward others following her husband's death. It seemed that she had finally been relieved of the burden of caring for him. She had not worked for a long time, had received a large sum of money, and felt no need to find employment. Instead, she chose to spend most of her time with her children. However, Raynella soon grew tired of this lifestyle. She and her children began visiting a nearby swimming pool owned by a man named David Lead. David was a well-known figure in the local community. He was married and had a daughter. Raynella and David had little in common. Raynella was well-educated, while David had dropped out of school at 19 without graduating. He eventually became a hairdresser and opened his own beauty salon, gaining recognition in town. David was always proud of his appearance and underwent several cosmetic surgeries to look younger. Unfortunately, his satisfaction with his looks did not last long. One day, an accident caused a large piece of debris to hit his eye, disfiguring his face and leaving him partially blind. Since then, he has worn sunglasses. As Raynella and her children spent more time at the pool, they grew closer to David. He began an affair with Raynella, which his wife eventually discovered. She filed for divorce, but by then, David was deeply in love with Raynella and indifferent to the divorce proceedings. They quickly divorced, and in January 1993, Raynella married David. He moved to her farm just 6 months after Ed Dossett's death, which sparked new rumors and gossip in the community about her marrying her late husband's friend, especially considering the suspicious circumstances surrounding Ed Dossett's death. The situation became a real scandal. Initially, she and David ignored the questions and gossip, but eventually, the rumors died down. Soon after, she began to display her domineering and harsh personality. David's daughter, who had seen him driving his pickup truck in a bad mood, asked her father what had happened. He told her that he had argued with Raynella, but did not want to share more details. His daughter was shocked, as it was the first time she had seen him like that. In 1994, a heartbreaking tragedy struck Raynella. Her son died tragically. He and his sister had been driving with a temporary license that allowed them to drive as long as a licensed adult was present. However, that day, the boy was driving without adult supervision, lost control of the car, and crashed into an oncoming vehicle. The boy, who was not wearing a seatbelt, was thrown through the windshield and suffered serious injuries, dying before the ambulance arrived. Raynella was taken to the police station for questioning after the incident. Several witnesses stated that there were no adults in the car when the boy was driving, but Raynella claimed she was in the car with the children and that the tragic accident happened before she could react. Despite this, the police believed Raynella's story and chose not to prosecute her. If the case had been thoroughly investigated, Raynella could have faced consequences that could have prevented further events from occurring. However, her persuasive speaking skills helped her avoid further legal trouble. Following these events, divorce proceedings began between Kay Clift Walker, Ed Dossett's former secretary, and her current husband, Steve Walker. Her husband was shocked to discover that their second child with Kay was actually Ed Dossett's. Raynella, who knew about the affair, contacted Steve to discuss the situation. The day after they met, she requested another meeting to discuss important documents. Raynella invited Steve to her farm to review the documents confirming the paternity of all of Kay's children with Ed Dossett. In a shocking turn of events, Raynella pulled out a loaded pistol and began attacking Steve. Fortunately, he dodged the bullets and escaped unharmed. Steve considered calling the police for assistance, but Raynella acted first and called them herself. In a panic, she falsely claimed that Steve had brought a weapon to her home and threatened her. The police quickly discovered the truth, leading to Raynella being charged with attempted murder. After a preliminary hearing, she was released on $200,000 bail. Raynella later accepted a plea deal, which resulted in a sentence of 6 years of probation and 100 days of community service. Meanwhile, Raynella continues to research her inheritance after David's death. His daughter, who was only entitled to 10% of the estate, was supposed to inherit the house and the rest of the estate. In January 2000, David began to suffer from various health problems, including hallucinations, high cholesterol, and even a stroke. Raynella handled the situation by preventing family members from visiting David and limiting contact with his daughter and their nephew. Fortunately, David recovered and was discharged from the hospital, but his health problems forced him to quit his business. By this time, he was showing signs of dementia. During a visit to a neurologist, he vaguely recalled an incident involving suffocation with a pillow, but the neurologist dismissed it as another hallucination. On March 13, David's mother was hospitalized for cancer. Unexpectedly, Raynella visited her at the hospital and then contacted David's daughter, asking her to visit her father. She expressed that she had left a plate of food and medicine on the bedside table, but was worried that David might not finish eating. It was unclear why she suddenly became so anxious, and how she knew he had even touched the food. The call was strange because, in recent months, Raynella had done everything she could to limit David's daughter's contact with her father and prevent them from communicating. Additionally, she had never visited her mother-in-law, so her appearance at the hospital took everyone by surprise. David's daughter then went to the house to check on her father, but no one answered her phone calls or opened the door. She eventually found David with a head injury and quickly called the police. When the police arrived, they found Raynella immediately discussing her decision to end David's life. She insisted he had good reasons for this, citing his long-term battle with depression. However, David loved his daughter very much, and his mental health seemed stable because he was managing his illness well. Raynella told the police that on the day he died, she had left him food on the bedside table before visiting her mother-in-law. Before leaving, he had spoken to her and kissed her goodbye. At the time, she hadn't thought much of it, but now she realized that was his way of saying goodbye to her for the last time. Raynella claimed that David's actions constituted a voluntary departure from life, but she also mentioned that it was the first time she had seen a weapon. However, given her dubious past full of lies and contradictions, few believed her. There were some strange details in this case. At the crime scene, 3 shots were fired. The first missed, the second was fatal, and the third also missed David. Additionally, 1 shot came from a different type of weapon that was not found at the crime scene. David was wounded on the left side of his head, despite being right-handed and having lost most of his vision in his left eye due to a previous traffic accident. This suggests that he would have struggled to aim accurately at that part of his head. David's family believes that Raynella was responsible for the murder. It seemed that the Raynella might eventually be brought to justice, but she acted quickly by arranging for the cremation of her second husband, David. This move destroyed much of the evidence that could have been used in court, making it impossible to conduct a proper autopsy. David's daughter was devastated by her father's death, and even more shocked to discover that he had left her virtually nothing. Despite efforts to bring the police into the case, 3 years passed without any progress. Raynella manipulated those around her with her money and status, and she lied to the police several times. Finally, in 2006, when David's daughter realized that she could not obtain justice through government agencies, she decided to hire a private investigator. Her goal was to seek justice and prevent Raynella from gaining an undeserved inheritance from David. She was certain that her father would never do this to her. It was all a setup. Private investigators uncovered clear evidence of Raynella's guilt, leading to the reopening of the official investigation into David's death. The police finally took the evidence against Raynella seriously and thoroughly examined the cases surrounding the deaths of her 2 husbands. The toxicology report on Ed Dossett's death revealed an error. In fact, there was a dangerously high level of morphine in his system, which could have been fatal. With such a high concentration of the painkiller, he would not have been able to move, let alone care for his cows. In 2006, Raynella was charged with the murder of Ed Dossett. It became clear that his death was no accident. She had discreetly contacted a funeral home and paid for her second husband's cremation, raising suspicions that she was trying to hide the evidence. As a result, Raynella faced charges of premeditated murder. However, she portrayed herself as the victim, convincing several people in the process and manipulating the trial in her favor. Raynella did not plead guilty to the murder. She was released on $5,000 bail, and her formal trial was set for March 2009. The jury was unable to reach a unanimous decision, with only one juror believing she was innocent, while the others believed she had planned to kill her husband for financial gain. As a result of this impasse, the case was retried in 2010. During the retrial, experts revealed that the bullet that killed David Leith was fired from a distance of at least 30 centimeters, too far for a suicide attempt. David did not have the arm length necessary to wield a weapon at that distance. Fingerprints found on the murder weapon also suggested that the scene had been staged after the crime. Raynella visited David's mother at the hospital to establish an alibi. She tried to contact David's daughter, locate her father, and call the police. The prosecutor argued that David had been given a cocktail of drugs typically used for surgical patients, which only nurses had access to. On January 25, 2010, after 2 days of deliberations, a jury found Raynella Dossett Leith guilty of first-degree murder for David's death. She was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 50 years. Shortly after the verdict, charges related to the death of Raynella's first husband, Ed Dossett, were dismissed for reasons that remain unclear. In early 2011, it was discovered that the verdict had been entered while the judge was a drug addict, which may have influenced the outcome. On the plus side, David's will was found to be invalid because his illness had impaired his mental capacity. As a result, half of the estate was confiscated, and Raynella returned David's assets to his daughter. Her lawyers attempted to appeal the case, but their efforts were unsuccessful. The defense continued to fight and achieved a breakthrough in January 2017, when Raynella returned to court. The prosecution argued that Raynella's murder plan fell apart when she fired the first shot, which dramatically changed the situation. The second shot was believed to be the fatal one. David's daughter testified that Raynella had been acting strangely and unusually on the day of the incident. The prosecution contended that Raynella's odd behavior was an attempt to create an alibi for herself. Steve Walker, Kay's husband, who had been attacked by Raynella earlier, also spoke at the trial. He stated that Raynella clearly intended to kill him and even shouted about her intentions. He believed that he was only saved by luck. He was furious that Raynella had escaped punishment and that she believed she could act without consequences. It appeared that Raynella picked up the weapon again and attacked her second husband. To further support her claim that David had taken his own life, the defense brought an expert into the courtroom. The defense expert demonstrated to the jury how David Leith could have fired all 3 shots. Ultimately, the judge acquitted Raynella Dossett Leith, stating that there was no evidence to prove her guilt. She noted that no blood or gunpowder residue was found on David's body, and that Raynella had an alibi for the time of his death because she was in the hospital. There was no evidence to prove that Raynella committed the crime or that she was the last person to see David alive. The defense celebrated the verdict, while the prosecution and jury were disappointed. Raynella, who has repeatedly evaded the justice system, remains free. Now 76, she lives on her farm, and no one dares to question her about the deaths of her 2 husbands. Her children support her. Unfortunately, it seems the truth about these tragic deaths will never be discovered, but many believe she was directly involved in the deaths of both husbands. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Alan Helmick. Alan Helmick, born in 1946 and raised in Colorado, developed a passion for sports, especially baseball, from an early age. After completing his education, he married his teacher, Sharon. Together, they raised a family, welcoming 3 daughters and a son. Alan became a successful businessman, starting a real estate company and then expanding into retail and the automotive industry, which helped his family thrive. Sharon was a devoted homemaker, taking care of the family. Their seemingly perfect marriage lasted for 30 happy years until tragedy struck in January 2003, when Sharon suddenly died of a heart attack. This loss was the deepest shock of Alan's life. He struggled with grief and depression for a long time. Even 2 years later, in 2005, the pain of her death still affected him. To cope, Alan focused on supporting his children and began taking ballroom dance classes, pursuing the dream that Sharon had wanted to share with him just before her death. During the classes in Grand Junction, Alan met Miriam Giles, a 48-year-old dance teacher who had recently moved to Colorado. Miriam had also suffered a great loss. Her daughter had died of an overdose in 2000, which was ruled an accident. Unable to bear the pain, Miriam's husband took his own life while she slept next to him. Hearing her story deeply affected Alan, as he could empathize with her pain, and their relationship blossomed into a romance. After a few weeks of getting to know each other, Miriam moved into Alan's home. They lived together for a few years before getting married in 2006 and started looking for a new place to live. Miriam, a horse enthusiast, convinced Alan to buy a large plot of land with a stable. They eventually found a location that was ideal for Alan, as it allowed him to run his business from an office closer than before. He showed his love for Miriam by showering her with gifts. From the outside, Alan and his wife appeared to be a happily married couple. However, Alan's daughter was concerned about the pace at which their relationship was progressing. Despite this worry, both Alan and Miriam seemed genuinely happy. On the day of the dance competition, Miriam felt unwell. While Alan was busy processing documents and signing papers, she frequently went to the bathroom. Eventually, she walked out to the parking lot where Alan was waiting in his car. Miriam wanted to get some things from the trunk. After opening the trunk and searching for a while, she felt unwell again and hurriedly went back inside. Meanwhile, Alan continued to wait in the car. Suddenly, he noticed smoke coming from the back of the car. At first, he thought it was just exhaust smoke and turned off the engine. However, the smoke became thicker and blacker. Realizing something was wrong, Alan got out of the car and saw a fire in the trunk. He quickly ran inside to get a fire extinguisher. On the way, he met Miriam, who was using a container to get water from the bathroom to put out the fire. The fire department was called and quickly arrived to extinguish the flames. When Alan checked the trunk, he found a burnt rope soaked in gasoline. This raised suspicions, indicating that the fire was intentionally set and not due to a car malfunction. The fire department interviewed witnesses and assessed the scene, concluding that only Miriam could have caused the fire. However, Alan firmly believes that this is impossible, but he could not ignore the possibility that an intruder had quietly approached the car. He refused to believe that his beloved wife would try to harm him, let alone kill him. He dismissed the incident as an accident, although he expressed some doubts. The event was quickly forgotten, and although there was still uncertainty after the fire, the couple's life returned to normal. Unfortunately, during this time, Alan fell ill. He spent most of May in bed, but by June, he was starting to feel a little better. Although he was diagnosed with hypertension, he began to adopt a more active lifestyle. Alan loved life and looked forward to the opportunity to return to the field when he regained his health. After a long illness, he seemed to be recovering. However, he did not answer missed calls. This continued until June 2008, when Alan's daughter attempted to contact her stepmother, Miriam. She was also unable to reach him, so she left a voicemail mentioning her plans to visit her father. Unfortunately, her efforts went ignored. On the evening of June 6, she continued to try to contact her father, noting that she had not been able to reach him for over a week. She called her stepmother back, but there was no answer. In the voicemail, she asked her stepmother to inform her father that she wanted to see him and was concerned about his well-being. Despite living nearby, all of her attempts to contact him went unanswered, making it unclear why she did not go to the farm to check on him in person. At approximately 8 a.m. on June 10, 2008, Miriam left the house to go to the local Walmart. After shopping, she contacted her horse trainer. At approximately 9 a.m., Miriam called her husband, Alan, and left a voicemail saying that she loved him and planned to pick up groceries before meeting him at a nearby Chinese restaurant at 10 a.m. Alan did not respond to her message. Miriam tried to call him back but could not reach him and asked him to call her. By 11 a.m., Miriam was at the Chinese restaurant waiting for Alan. After about 15 minutes, she called him a third time, feeling increasingly anxious and upset that he did not answer. She decided to go home with her groceries. As she entered the laundry room from the garage by her usual route, she was surprised to see an overturned trash can. When she looked around the corner, she saw Alan's legs sticking out. Miriam saw her husband lying motionless on the floor, which frightened her. She dropped her belongings, began to cry, and immediately called the police. She told them that she had returned home from shopping and found her husband dead in the living room. Although she was initially certain that Alan was dead, she followed the operator's instructions to perform CPR. However, she felt it was in vain because he was unresponsive. A patrol car arrived at the Miriam family home. The police found Alan lying on the floor. The officer noted that Alan was cold to the touch and had no pulse. There was blood nearby, and the officer observed several open cabinet drawers and a trash can that had been knocked over. A .25 caliber shell casing was also found. When his wife Miriam was taken away from the scene for questioning and photographs, the police found it odd that she was completely clean, despite her claim that she had attempted CPR on her husband as requested. When questioned, Miriam admitted that she had washed her hands after administering first aid. However, the kitchen sink was found to be completely clean and dry, leading the police to believe that she had lied. They suspected that she had not actually tried to help her husband and had only pretended to do so during the phone call. In addition, her calm and even cold demeanor only added to the police's suspicions. Miriam, who has now been taken to the police station for further questioning, recounted the events of that tragic day from the beginning. She confirmed that she had woken up early, made coffee, and talked to her husband on the terrace. They discussed their plans for the day. After the conversation, she took a shower and made the final adjustments to her shopping list before going out to buy household items. It was a normal day, and she had called her horse trainer and, following his advice, bought carrots for the animals. When she first tried to call her husband, he did not answer, which was unusual for him. After the third call, she became alarmed and slightly angry. When she returned home, she found her husband lying on the floor. Confused as to what had happened, she immediately called the police. Miriam mentioned that Alan's son, Alan Jr., was at their house and had left for work around 6 a.m. The conversation then turned to Alan Jr., who had been living in their house for several weeks. He would come home after his shift. Alan Jr. had a separate room and used a different entrance to his room. He occupied part of the first floor and tended to live in isolation. At the time of the incident, Miriam had not seen Alan Jr. for about 4 days. She suspected that he was not getting along with Alan, but she did not provide any strong evidence to support this belief. Just before the incident, his son, Alan Jr., had come to visit him from Alaska. They had some paperwork to take care of. Miriam mentioned that they were experiencing problems. However, at the last minute, things took an unexpected turn. Alan had banned his son from coming and warned Miriam to call the police if Alan Jr. showed up at their house. Miriam said that Alan Jr. was in a dispute over the ownership of the stove and that his father had spoken out against him. This situation contributed to the deterioration of the relationship between father and son, and they did not see each other. She acknowledged the possibility that Alan Jr. might have threatened her father, but she was unsure of the specifics. It seemed that Miriam was trying to blame Alan Jr. The police discovered a particularly strange detail in Miriam's story. She could not even remember the addresses or ages of her husband's children, which was very unusual. Alan Jr.'s alibi was later verified, clearing him of suspicion. Other family members claimed there had been no conflict between Alan and his son, making it clear that Miriam's story was a lie. The police began to follow her movements around the city on the day of the incident. They found it strange that she made some unusual trips, especially when she went across town just to buy a bag of carrots, which was clearly not enough for their horses. They pointed out that the vegetables could easily have been purchased at Walmart. This behavior led the police to suspect that she might be trying to create an alibi to explain her long absence from home. Miriam became the prime suspect. In response to the detectives' questions, she said that they had a prenuptial agreement stating that all property acquired before the marriage would go to his children. She hinted that Alan might have been the victim of a robbery. Miriam observed that some shelves had been pulled out and found her husband's wallet left in the kitchen. Normally, the wallet contained several $100s in cash and several credit cards, but it was now missing. Their house was filled with valuables, but they never locked their doors. Miriam claimed that they never used locks or keys. Miriam stated that her husband had no enemies and that their neighbors were decent people. However, she also claimed that she was not involved in her husband's romantic affairs, so she could not provide details about any potential rivals Alan might have encountered. During questioning, Miriam revealed that Alan owned a gun collection. She also mentioned that Alan had struggled with health issues. She noted that he had quit smoking about a year before the incident due to high blood pressure, and that his health had declined since then. Furthermore, he had been taking antidepressants to cope with emotional difficulties stemming from the death of his first wife. Miriam insisted that Alan had no enemies. However, she mentioned a minor dispute that occurred a few weeks before the incident with a contractor who was working on their property. Alan had asked for a handwritten invoice and then delayed payment for several weeks, but the debt was eventually settled. The police inquired whether there was any insurance policy on her husband. Miriam was unsure, but mentioned that Alan owed investors about $400,000 for various projects. This raised suspicions, as she had previously stated that she was unaware of her husband's financial problems. Unexpectedly, Miriam asked the police if they suspected her of being guilty, to which they responded that they had some doubts about her story. In response, she produced a large stack of receipts from various locations in the city where she had made purchases on the day of the murder, as if to demonstrate that she had meticulously collected evidence to support her alibi. After questioning, Miriam's clothing from the night of the murder was collected and tested for gunpowder residue. She was then released. During the autopsy, the medical examiner discovered a gunshot wound to the back of Alan's head. No gunpowder residue was found on his skin. Alan died instantly from the wound, falling to the ground with bruising on his head, arms, and body. There were no defensive wounds, suggesting that he had been attacked by surprise. Toxicology revealed the presence of caffeine and nicotine, but no alcohol, illegal drugs, or prescription medications were detected. It was clear that this was a homicide. An expert determined that Alan had died several hours before the police arrived at the house, around 8 to 9 a.m. His wife left the house around that time, suggesting that she may have been involved in the crime, but there were no traces of blood or gunpowder on her clothes or hands. However, traces of gunpowder were found at the scene, suggesting that Miriam may have changed clothes and cleaned up. The police accessed Alan's cell phone. Earlier that morning, his daughter had called him to discuss some documents and a meeting to sign them. There were also calls from unknown numbers, possibly creditors who had contacted him after hearing about the tragedy. In addition, the phone had received many calls from friends and family. To gather more information, the police interviewed the housekeeper, who had known the Allen family for many years. The housekeeper had cleaned the house and had met Alan before his first wife died. She recalled that she had last been to their home on June 9, 2008, just one day before the murder. She confirmed that the door was usually unlocked, allowing her to enter and begin cleaning as usual. However, she noticed that Alan was acting unusually. He was normally very talkative, but that day he ignored her presence and did not even greet her. He seemed very nervous and did not make eye contact when he sat down at the table. Shortly after, a strange man arrived, leading her to believe that there was a problem in the couple's relationship. Unfortunately, she was unable to provide any further useful information. The police decided to look into Miriam's background and discovered some interesting information. After the tragic deaths of her daughter and husband, she faced legal troubles that forced her to sell her assets to settle lawsuits. When the police spoke to a family member, they learned that there were indeed financial problems, largely due to Miriam's extravagant spending habits. Alan was a successful businessman who provided generously for his children, but the purchase of a horse stable and a dance studio, along with the high cost of maintaining the horses, had left them financially devastated. The situation became even more suspicious when, on the same day his car caught fire, Miriam discovered that he had sold his business to pay off debts and had just received the money before they set off. Interestingly, Miriam had excused herself to go to the bathroom just before the fire broke out. It seemed that she had lost interest in her husband because of their financial troubles and decided to take his money and stay away from him. In addition, none of Alan's relatives were able to contact him in his final days. Alan's daughters felt that Miriam was trying to prevent them from reaching out to their father. The more the police spoke to Alan's relatives, the more inconsistencies and falsehoods they discovered in Miriam's testimony. At the time, The police believed that Miriam had a financial motive. However, Miriam claimed that she did not benefit from her husband's death due to their prenuptial agreement. According to the agreement, all of Alan's assets would be divided among the children, but the house they bought during their marriage was considered community property. This meant that Miriam could claim half of it if her husband died, which was a significant amount of money. Many witnesses believed that Alan's wife was the only person capable of killing him. Some suspected that his sudden decline in health shortly before his death was related to an attempted poisoning. These suspicions were partly supported by the fact that his symptoms were consistent with those of poisoning. However, an autopsy found no toxins in his system. It is possible that the toxins had been processed by his body during his long illness. Additionally, another daughter of Alan, who had been living with her father and stepmother for some time, observed Miriam using Alan's mobile phone without permission. Alan's daughter believed that Miriam had disconnected the phone, preventing Alan from contacting his family. This behavior became apparent during the time when Alan's relatives were unable to reach him. The police investigated the deaths of Miriam's daughter and her ex-husband, Jack Giles, and found them to be highly suspicious. The daughter died of a drug overdose, but it is unclear how she obtained the fatal dose. She had a close relationship with her father, but was estranged from her mother, which contributed to Jack's depression. He died 2 years later under unusual circumstances. He had been shot in the right side of the head, although he was left-handed. During this time, Miriam was the sole beneficiary of life insurance policies for both her daughter and Jack, leading the family to suspect a connection between their deaths. Miriam quickly received and spent the insurance money, but 6 months later, a court ordered her to give half of Jack's insurance money to his child from a previous relationship. After Jack's death, Miriam left Florida for Colorado, where she married Alan Hemlick. A disturbing development arose when it was revealed that she had a history of fraud, including attempts to cash counterfeit checks and being implicated in several burglaries. When police investigated her background, they discovered a long history of legal troubles in various states, where she had used multiple false identities to engage in illegal activities. Although she claimed that she would inherit nothing but the house if Alan died, police discovered a $250,000 life insurance policy in his name. Furthermore, shortly before Alan was murdered, Miriam attempted to increase the coverage to $2 million. However, when she tried to claim the money after Alan's death, she was informed that she could not do so because he had been late with his payments earlier in the year. The payment issue arose because Miriam had restricted Alan's use of his cell phone, causing him to miss payment reminders. 2 weeks after the murder, Miriam's best friend reported some disturbing experiences. Miriam called, sounding frightened, and explained that someone had broken into her home while she was at work. A friend offered her a place to stay. The next day, they decided to go to Alan's house together. There, they discovered a yellow envelope with a postcard hidden under the carpet. The postcard, written in a scrawl with many errors, ominously stated that Alan was the next victim, not the last, in Miriam's life. Feeling threatened, Miriam quickly contacted her lawyer. Although she feared for her life, she expressed concern that the letter writer might return to her home. She also mentioned seeing strange cars parked nearby and hearing unusual noises the night before the murder. Police examined the note and found it was written on a rare type of postcard, which led them to the place of purchase. Within days, they had surveillance footage confirming that Miriam had bought the postcard and sent it to herself. The store clerk even remembered her. The investigation revealed that Miriam had harmed her own parents. First, she robbed her father and even burned down his house. Then she went to her mother's house, who lived in another state, and robbed her before fleeing to Mississippi. Miriam had also stolen from Alan several times, leading to suspicious transactions on his account. A bank employee noticed these irregularities and tried to inform Alan, but he was unaware of the situation because his wife had hidden her phone. It was discovered that more than 140 had been withdrawn from Alan's account, although he had not made any significant purchases. This was unusual, as all of his associates stated that Alan often planned large purchases in advance and discussed them with his accountant. The day before his death, Alan appeared very upset, perhaps because he had learned about the unauthorized withdrawals, which could have caused him considerable stress. Could this situation have led to a murder? When the police decided to arrest Miriam for the murder, they discovered that she had left Colorado and was staying at her son's house in Florida. Miriam had taken her belongings from Alan's house with her. She quickly registered on a dating website, stating that she was looking for a wealthy man who earned at least $500,000 a year to meet her needs. During the investigation, police found several searches on Alan's computer related to horse euthanasia. There were numerous searches for medical drugs used for this purpose, including dosages of sleeping pills and poisons, along with information about their dangers. This was concerning because Alan had nothing to do with horses. It was his wife who cared for them. It appeared that she was the one searching for this information, raising suspicions that Alan may have been the victim of poisoning. Police suspicions were confirmed when it was learned that Miriam's family had no sick horses that needed euthanasia. On November 8, Miriam Giles was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. The prosecution had a substantial amount of evidence for the case, but relied heavily on circumstantial evidence. It is believed that Miriam had been trying to kill her husband for a long time. She was also suspected of attempting to blow up Alan's car while he was inside it. This incident may have prompted the police to begin their investigation. At the time, the film No Country for Old Men was popular, featuring a villain who blows up a car. The prosecution theorized that Miriam had been inspired by the film and attempted to kill Alan in a similar manner. A DVD of the film was actually found in their home. On December 12, 2008, bail was set at $2 million, and Miriam remained in jail. It was discovered that she had used several forged documents, including a passport and a driver's license. The prosecutor insisted that her entire life had been based on deception. Many of her statements during interviews were presented to the jury, along with numerous instances of her lying and her extensive criminal record that contributed to Alan's death. However, the prosecution relied heavily on circumstantial evidence to support the murder charge. The defense argued that there was no concrete evidence that Miriam used a gun to shoot her husband, and that the murder weapon was never found. After witnessing the defense's desperate attempts to prove Miriam's innocence, the jury ultimately found her guilty. Miriam Giles was convicted of first-degree murder and arson of her father's house, in addition to multiple counts of document forgery. After a brief deliberation, the court sentenced Miriam to 108 years in prison. The prosecutor's office then attempted to charge her with the murder of her first husband, Jack, as she was the prime suspect. However, the evidence gathered during the investigation was deemed insufficient, and no charges were filed. Hello, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Zach Bowen and Addie Hall. Zach Bowen is a cheerful, confident, and friendly young man. In the summer of 1995, Zach took a short trip to the United States with his father. They arrived in New Orleans, Louisiana, where they planned to stay for a short time. Zach's father eventually decided to leave, but Zach wanted to stay because he had fallen in love with the city at first sight. He found a job at a bar and began to establish his life there. Soon, Zach met Lana, a dancer from Texas. She was sociable, cheerful, and somewhat carefree, which matched Zach's personality. They developed feelings for each other and started dating. Their relationship progressed rapidly, and Lana eventually discovered she was pregnant. At the time, Zach was just 18 while Lana was 28. Concerned about their age difference, Lana considered ending the relationship, but ultimately decided she wanted to keep the baby. Although she didn't want to pressure Zach into becoming a father, he expressed his desire to start a family with her. Lana faced a tough decision about continuing the relationship. She worried that Zach might not be ready to be a husband and father, despite his genuine love for her. While she had feelings for him, she recognized that their relationship could face challenges in the future. Zach had initially come to New Orleans to pursue an education and become an English teacher. But ultimately, he chose to prioritize his family, and they got married. After some time, Lana became pregnant again, which meant the family now had 2 children. Zach, the young father, urgently needed a better-paying job. Unfortunately, there were no suitable opportunities in the city, especially given Zach's limited education. He only had a high school diploma. As a result, he decided to enlist in the army, which took him to Iraq. There, Zach faced a hostile environment that was drastically different from his family life in New Orleans. He was constantly aware that danger lurked around every corner, with stray bullets and the threat of death. Military life was tough, and Zach lost several close friends during his service. He became determined to fail health and fitness tests so he could return home to his family and Lana, his sick wife, who had been diagnosed with hepatitis C and was in poor condition. His plan succeeded, and he returned home, but he lost all the benefits of military service in the process. This left him with psychological trauma as he transitioned back to civilian life. Despite his struggles, he never complained and was reluctant to discuss his experiences in Iraq. Any questions about that time plunged him into deep sadness. Lana quickly noticed that he had become emotionally distant and cold. It seemed that his love for her and their children had faded since he left for military service. Initially, Lana attempted to reconnect with Zach, but soon realized her efforts were in vain. Eventually, she decided to end her relationship with him. Later, Lana confessed that she no longer viewed him as the man she had married. When they got married, she was unaware of the heavy responsibilities Zach carried. At 27, Zach, the former military man, became single again. He gained custody of their children in New Orleans and found a job at a bar in the French Quarter. There, Zach quickly became popular, especially among the female customers, thanks to his exceptional cocktail-making skills and ability to engage with clients. He was seen as an attractive and intelligent man who knew how to charm women. At the bar, Zach met his colleague Addie Hall. She was quite different from him, aligning more with a hip ideology. Initially, she didn't take Zach seriously. However, Zach was very interested in her. Winning her over proved challenging, as she was not the easiest person to court. However, Zach is determined to win her heart. During this time, Addie worked as a bartender, and they began to communicate more. Gradually, Zach managed to capture her interest, and they grew closer. A week before Hurricane Katrina made landfall near New Orleans, they started dating. Zach shared many things about himself, but kept a significant secret. He had a wife and 2 children. As the hurricane intensified in the Gulf of Mexico, Addie discovered the truth about Zach's hidden life, and she was devastated. To make matters worse, Zach's ex-wife, Lana, reached out for help as she faced difficulties on the coast. With the storm causing closures everywhere, Lana was stranded with her 2 small children, without a job or a car, and turned to Zach as her only option to resolve her problems. Of course, this was not what Addie had planned. She did not want Zach to leave during the storm. Although it was a matter concerning his children, she feared that he might return to Lana, which could jeopardize their relationship. In a fit of anger, she caused a huge scandal, prompting Zach to decide to stay with her. This decision infuriated Lana, especially since they were all stuck in his apartment in the heart of New Orleans' French Quarter. They ignored the mandatory evacuation order, convinced they could withstand the storm. As Hurricane Katrina approached, they watched news updates until the power went out. They soon realized the immense power of nature. As this hurricane became the most destructive in U.S. history, winds reached speeds of up to 200 km/h, demolishing everything in their path. Addie listened to the terrifying howl of the wind. Luckily, she was unharmed by the storm, but many of the homes around her had been destroyed. More than 80% of the city was underwater. At this point, Lana tried to contact Zach but was unable to get through. She feared that he might not have survived the hurricane, but she had no way to confirm that. Fortunately, he was safe. Most of the French Quarter was largely intact, aside from some fallen trees, broken signs, and scattered debris. Zach and Addie's apartment astonishingly weathered the storm, which both of them viewed as a miracle. They saw it as a sign that their love would only grow stronger after the storm passed. They joined efforts with other survivors to help rebuild. They cleared away fallen trees in the French Quarter and prepared meals for those in need. They even organized small gatherings on the street. With plenty to drink, they helped form a close-knit group of survivors who looked up to Zach and Addie as guiding lights. For them, Zach and Addie's experience felt like a series of romantic adventures amidst the ruins of New Orleans. However, unbeknownst to them, they were blissfully unaware of how quickly happiness can fade. The destruction was so extensive that government agencies took a long time to gather information about the survivors. For a significant period, they couldn't reach the survivors, who had to fend for themselves. Addie's loved ones and Lana were unable to contact them for weeks and feared the worst. Eventually, rescuers arrived, accompanied by a film crew that documented the situation. Zach and Addie quickly became well known in the French Quarter, with Addie even appearing on the cover of the New York Times. Not only did they help many people escape from the rubble, but they also provided support to others, assisting them in coping with the aftermath of the storm. Zach and Addie had the chance to reach out to their family members. Zach's first call was to his mother. Despite the destruction around them, both he and his mother felt surprisingly upbeat and even enjoyed the atmosphere. Their loved ones were happy that everything was okay. However, this was not the case for Lana, Zach's ex-wife, who was still grieving the near loss of him. Almost a month has passed, but Lana still hasn't heard from him. Then, unexpectedly, Lana saw a magazine cover featuring Zach happily grilling with his new girlfriend, Addie. This infuriated her. While she had been anxious and unable to reach him, he seemed to be living a carefree life. Compounding her frustration, she was unemployed and struggling to pay her bills. She felt personally insulted by Zach's actions and was taken aback by how unconcerned he appeared. Eventually, as the city began to recover and restore its electricity and communication systems, Lana managed to contact Zach. They arranged to meet at a bar in the French Quarter where he worked, and Addie joined them for the reunion. Lana insisted that it was time for him to pay his bills and support his children. She expected him to provide full support. Meanwhile, Addie felt jealous watching Lana take charge and boss everyone around. At that moment, Zach and Addie's seemingly perfect life began to fall apart. The once famous couple now found themselves as just two ordinary residents of New Orleans, needing to return to work and fulfill their responsibilities. No one seemed to remember the contributions they had made to the city's recovery. After the hurricane, Zach and Addie, the once cheerful and active couple, started to spiral downwards. They turned to alcohol and banned substances. Almost all their earnings went toward these vices, leaving them with barely enough to cover rent, food, or bills. The situation worsened as Zach earned too little to meet his own needs, let alone support his children or Addie. The effects of traumatic brain injury, depression, and post-traumatic stress disorder from military service became increasingly evident for Zach. One of the most painful experiences he faced during his time in Iraq was the tragic death of a family. He had formed a friendship with an Iraqi boy and had even helped the boy's mother navigate through city checkpoints. Unfortunately, when insurgents learned of this, they killed the entire family, including the boy. Zach felt immense guilt over the child's death, believing he was responsible for the horrific act, and he struggled to forgive himself. These painful memories kept replaying in his mind, and he suffered from depression, but never sought help from professionals. After returning home, Zach appeared cheerful and happy, but this was only a facade. His girlfriend Addie was aware of his struggles but didn't grasp their severity. Instead of seeking help or confiding in loved ones, Zach tried to cope with his grief through alcohol and banned substances. Recent incidents had intensified his difficulties. He felt overwhelmed by pressure from various sources, especially due to Addie's popularity. Addie worked as a bartender, and the attention she received from customers made Zach increasingly jealous. He often lashed out at her, accusing her of flirting with the men at the bar. Addie explained that her friendly demeanor was essential for earning good tips, which they needed to make ends meet. In reality, she had always relied on this approach, as friendly staff typically earn more. Before the hurricane hit New Orleans, the situation didn't seem so troubling. However, as other problems piled up, Zach began to react more intensely to everything around him. Addie believed that Zach's aggressive and angry behavior was due to his use of banned substances. He abused strong stimulants, and the combination with alcohol made his behavior unpredictable. Additionally, Addie was dealing with her own mental health issues, specifically bipolar disorder, and she often neglected her medication. This contributed to her own outbursts of anger, which led to frequent arguments between them. In retaliation, Zach began to frequently disappear at night. This made her jealous and made her realize that he was doing it on purpose. She even threatened to break up with him. Eventually, all this tension led to an argument that ended in a fight, during which Zach hit Addie for the first time. The day after, Zach bought a ticket to Washington. He informed his friends and family that he had broken up with Addie and was ready to start a new life in a new state. However, he did not tell Addie this. One fine morning, she discovered a note on her pillow, announcing that he had left the city forever. That same morning, Addie's co-workers noticed her bruises. She admitted that they were caused by Zach, who had now vanished. Despite this, she didn't seem angry with him and appeared to be quite sad about their breakup. Their story, however, was not yet finished. Within the first week, Zach began telling his friends how much he was drawn to New Orleans and to Addie. He realized that he loved her very much. The two of them frequently spoke on the phone and agreed they couldn't imagine living without each other. It wasn't long before Zach decided to return to New Orleans once more. Unfortunately, Zach and Addie's life showed no signs of improvement. They began drinking heavily and using banned substances, which led to increasingly aggressive behavior in their relationship. They started to provoke fights in front of their friends, causing them to socialize less. No one wanted to be around them due to their erratic behavior. Zach often returned home with injuries, while Addie faced criticism at work for her appearance, as she looked like an alcoholic. Many in their group of friends witnessed Zach and Addie criticizing each other harshly, but they would reconcile the next day. Gradually, people began to disregard their threats. Besides, conflicts between the two became more common, causing resentment among the neighbors. One evening, Addie kicked Zach out of their apartment. He knocked on the door for hours, demanding to be let back in. The other residents were fed up with the noise and called the police. Although Zach eventually calmed down, this incident did little to improve their already strained relationship. They were about to break up because Zach decided to move away again. Financially, he was doing well, working long hours at the bar and earning good tips. He even managed to make an advance payment for a small studio apartment near the French Quarter. However, Addie's actions derailed his plans. She reported him to the police, accusing him of domestic violence. Although he had already agreed to move, she also informed the new landlord, who then refused to rent to him because of the accusation. Meanwhile, Addie threw all of Zach's belongings outside the door. She aimed to hurt him further by calling him a bad father and a failure. This caused Zach to fall into a miserable state, leading to a sad end. In a fit of rage, he burst into the apartment and began to strangle Addie, not stopping until she was unresponsive. After realizing what he had done, Zach faced a dilemma. Should he hide or turn himself in? Dark thoughts crossed his mind, including the idea of ending his own life. Instead, he retrieved Addie's notebook and began to write a detailed account of what had happened. He described how Addie had tried to kick him out, how their argument escalated into a physical confrontation, and how her hurtful words made him lose control. During this time, Zach was using numerous hard-banned substances and seemed to be in an altered state of mind. He shared his feelings, stating that he still loved Addie, even though she was lying dead on the floor. For the next several days, co-workers were surprised that Zach and Addie didn't show up for work. Friends and neighbors noticed that they had become unusually quiet. The arguments and screams had stopped. Over time, Addie's body began to decompose quickly, resulting in a foul odor. Despite consistently being under the influence of a banned substance, Zach realized he had to take action. He lowered the apartment temperature as much as possible, using the air conditioning, and placed Addie's body in the bathtub filled with cold water to slow down the decomposition. Meanwhile, all of this was detailed in Addie's diary. After that, Zach decided to resolve his issues with his employer. He explained that Addie had left for North Carolina and that they had broken up. He requested a few days off to clear his head, and his boss understood his need for time away. In the days that followed, Zach spent time with friends and acquaintances, but they noticed he looked worse each day. He appeared unshaven and neglected his appearance. While Zach attributed his decline to the emotional toll of the breakup, he continued to share stories about Addie moving to North Carolina. During this time, several people grew concerned, sensing something was off, but nobody alerted the police. Everyone knew Addie had a free-spirited personality, so her sudden move was not too surprising. Zach spent the next few days engaging in self-destructive behavior, drinking, using banned substances, and engaging in unhealthy intimate relationship. He eventually called Lana and suggested they meet up for old time's sake. Lana quickly recognized that her ex-husband was not in a good state of mind and declined the invitation. She tried to confirm whether Addie had really gone to North Carolina, but Zach insisted that Addie had. This was the last time they spoke before he vanished and cut off all communication. During this time, Zach experienced severe psychosis. He harmed himself and burned a mark for each year of his life, totaling 28 burns. He stopped answering calls and missed work for several weeks, even though his vacation had ended a long time ago. Lana and her mother were deeply worried about him. They received no updates on Zach and feared the worst. Unexpectedly, Zach replied to Lana's message. He revealed that he planned to go to a club that evening to have a good time. He brought a large bag of banned substances with him to a strip club, where he enjoyed himself with the dancers and appeared to be in a cheerful mood. Throughout the night, he used banned substances, drank heavily, and eventually returned to the apartment where Addie's body remained. His diary entries from this time indicate that he was spiraling into madness. He used spray paint to cover the apartment walls with his thoughts. He created a list of things he felt he had failed at in life, including friendships, work, his time in the army, and his relationship with Lana. He felt he had lost love and, most painfully, had destroyed even the most precious thing left in his life, Addie's body. In his diary, he detailed why he believed everything was ruined and the circumstances that led to these feelings. 12 days after the murder, Zach visited a local bar in the French Quarter. He ordered several drinks and then took them up to the roof. The bartenders grew concerned that he might not pay for his drinks, and their suspicions turned out to be correct. A short time later, Zach jumped off the roof and died from the fall. When the police arrived, they found a note in his pocket. In it, Zach admitted to killing Addie and expressed that he was choosing to end his own life. He believed this was the only way to atone for his mistakes. He provided the address where he lived with Addie, and mentioned that the police would find her body inside, along with a diary containing a detailed confession and an account of his last days. In the apartment, the police were confronted with a shocking scene. The first thing that struck them was the overwhelming sense of despair that filled the space. The walls were covered with Zach's writings, where he expressed his self-blame and pleaded for help, leaving behind haunting messages. Unfortunately, no one could hear his silent cries for assistance. The police immediately noticed the cold temperature and the absence of any foul odor in the apartment. There were no signs of decomposition or blood in the bathroom. However, a horrifying discovery awaited them in the kitchen. They found various parts of Addie's body, which had been handled by Zach. Addie's body was discovered in a large black garbage bag inside a refrigerator. When Lana was informed, she was devastated to learn about the terrible crime committed by Zach, especially when she found out that he had died as well. Lana broke down in tears during the phone call. In Addie's diary, Zach clearly describes his actions and thoughts in the days before his death, when his mind was in turmoil. He confessed that her body odor was getting stronger, which prompted him to make the decision to handle the body to prevent further decomposition. It seems he was desperately trying to address the issue of decomposition in a horrific manner. This case shocked the entire city of New Orleans. People were particularly disturbed to learn that Zach, a man who had once been a hero helping to rebuild after Hurricane Katrina, had become a killer. Many were taken aback by the disturbing details of the crime. Forensic experts examined the situation and concluded that Zach had succumbed to a mental breakdown due to several factors. He struggled with post-traumatic stress disorder, which worsened due to alcohol and substance abuse. Zach felt responsible for his life's failures. He couldn't establish a career, maintain relationships with his children, and lost Lana and his friends. Tragically, he also killed his girlfriend, Addie. Constantly burdened by his circumstances, Zach carried an overwhelming weight from his time in the armed forces that he couldn't share with anyone. The case of Zach Bowen highlights the devastating impact of war experiences and emphasizes the importance of seeking support and professional help. If Zach had received the assistance he needed, the story of Zach and Addie, who both survived Hurricane Katrina, might have turned out very differently. Residents of nearby apartments reported experiencing strange occurrences. They claimed to hear voices and see apparitions near the crime scene. At one point, they even organized tours of the area. Angel Ormston was born in 1975 in Mentor-on-the-Lake, a quiet suburb of Ohio, USA. This area has about 7,000 residents, and everyone knows each other. Children from local families often get along and grow up together. Life here is very simple and similar. The local high school serves as the main place of learning for most young people in town. Angel is a friendly and cheerful girl. She particularly enjoys walking around the area with her friends and often drives around with loud music. Local teenagers often gathered at a large shopping mall in a nearby, bigger city, which featured restaurants, a movie theater, and various stores. It made sense that Angel would find a part-time job there. In the summer of 1992, she started working at a fast food restaurant as she prepared for her senior year of high school. This job not only allowed her to earn some pocket money but also helped her save up for college. Her daily routine was consistent. She worked in the mornings and spent time with friends afterward. On the evening of July 31, 1992, 17-year-old Angel planned to go to her restaurant to pick up her paycheck and do some shopping. She promised her mother, Jackie, she would be home before the mall closed. Initially, her mother was not concerned and went to bed, assuming she was out with friends. The next morning, she woke up to find Angel missing from her room. Despite this, she didn't worry too much because it was common for her daughter to stay over at friends' houses, especially on weekends and holidays, so she pushed her uneasy thoughts aside. In this close-knit community, crime was rare, and young people often visited each other without worry. However, Angel, a high school student, didn't always keep her mother informed, which led to concerns. Her mother didn't want to restrict Angel too much, allowing her daughter considerable freedom that matched her independent spirit. Angel's upbringing was relaxed, her mother was adaptable and aimed to maintain a harmonious environment. Meanwhile, her father was often away as a long-distance truck driver. Despite the lack of strict rules or curfews in the Angel household, unsettling thoughts began to creep into Jackie's mind. Angel was missing all Saturday, and when her mother woke up on Sunday to find she still hadn't returned home, worries began to set in. She called families where Angel could stay, and her brother also went to the shopping center where she worked. Upon arriving at the parking lot, Angel's brother noticed her Honda Civic, which heightened his concern. He hoped to find Angel inside but instead found her purse, comb, and other personal items left on the driver's seat, indicating she might have vanished. He checked the burger joint where she worked but learned she hadn't shown up for a couple of days. Alarmed, he contacted Jackie, their mother, who hurried to the shopping center to retrieve Angel's car and uncover the truth while pushing aside her fears. Initially, she hoped it was just a series of coincidences. Angel often went out at night with her best friend, Stacy. That day, Stacy's family could not be reached, which gave Jackie some peace of mind. Nonetheless, anxiety grew as Jackie drove around the mall looking for Angel, but she found no trace of her daughter. Friends who did manage to contact her hadn't seen Angel since Friday. By 8 p.m., Jackie still couldn't reach Angel, deepening her worry. Jackie finally decided to report her daughter Angel as missing by going to the police. Although Angel was last seen on July 31st, Jackie did not visit the station until August 2nd. This delay raised suspicions among the police, but Jackie explained that she believed she needed to wait 48 hours before reporting someone missing. Jackie provided detailed information about Angel, including her life and relationships. Jackie asserted that, up until the very last moment, she was not worried that anything serious had happened to Angel. On the morning of Monday, August 2nd, Jackie managed to reach Stacy, who confirmed Jackie's fears. Stacy had spent the entire weekend at her sister's house and hadn't seen Angel. She was shocked to learn that her friend had been missing for over 2 days. Stacy tried to contact some mutual friends, but none had seen Angel. Following this, Jackie provided the police with new information, prompting them to initiate an active search for Angel. The police first examined Angel's car, which showed no signs of a struggle. The car was in normal condition, with no blood, signs of theft, or forced entry. The officers believed Angel may have left the car willingly. Given her age, they suggested she could have run away, but Jackie rejected this idea, citing their good relationship. Angel was not involved with banned substances and had always remained calm during her teenage years. Despite her independent nature, she was not the type to run away. In fact, she had been making future plans, including furthering her education at university. Detectives worked extensively to investigate Angel's disappearance. They suspected she might have been kidnapped from the car and collected many fingerprints at the scene. Although there were numerous prints, all belonged to family and close friends. Despite this, every individual had to be investigated to clear them as suspects since there were no other leads. The investigation began with Angel's father, a truck driver, but he was quickly ruled out because he had a verified alibi. He was in another state when his daughter went missing. Next, detectives looked into Angel's mother, Jackie. Her refusal to take a polygraph test raised significant suspicion and drew the attention of the investigators. They noted her delay in contacting the police and her decision to take Angel's car from the parking lot soon after learning about the disappearance, which further fueled suspicions. The police lacked the authority to compel her to take a polygraph test, and there was no direct evidence against her. As a result, the investigation continued with Jackie being the primary suspect. Jackie claimed that on the evening when Angel left home, she intended to go to a burger place. However, interviews with local staff revealed that Angel never arrived to pick up her paycheck that day. Investigators seized the opportunity to gather more information from Angel's colleagues. They quickly eliminated Jackie from the list of suspects due to Angel's good relationship with her family. However, they developed several other theories, including a suspicious connection to a former manager known for inappropriate behavior toward female employees. Investigators suspected that the former manager had been spying on female staff while they changed into their work uniforms. Later, he was fired for a harassment incident. Several female employees reported that this manager had touched them inappropriately. When the police investigated him, they discovered he had a criminal record for inappropriate behavior with minors, making him the main suspect. Other women also mentioned that he frequently focused on Angel, often looking for chances to be alone with her in the kitchen and making inappropriate comments. When this was discovered, the detectives were so focused on the case that they overlooked Jackie. The former manager was quickly located and interviewed, but he denied any involvement in Angel's disappearance. He said that she hasn't seen him since they worked together. He claimed that, on the day she went missing, he was far from his hometown and provided a timesheet showing that he was at another location of the fast food chain that day. Despite this evidence, detectives did not exclude him as a suspect and continued to question everyone at the restaurant, including both staff and management. Through their investigation, they uncovered a secret that Angel had kept from her family. She had been fired for consistently being late. While she was indeed heading to the restaurant to collect her final paycheck, this revelation did not provide any new leads regarding her disappearance. Gradually, all of Angel's co-workers were ruled out as suspects because they had alibis. Neither Angel's former manager nor her mother was considered a viable suspect in the case, making it difficult for the police to conduct their investigation. Communication with Angel's closest friends did not reveal any new information. Everyone was shocked at the idea that someone in her circle might wish her harm. She was gentle, trusting, and usually avoided conflict. However, her trusting nature made her vulnerable to someone who might manipulate her into a dangerous situation. After a long period without contact, fears grew that Angel had died. She hadn't reached out to anyone, appeared in public, or used any payment methods. Given these circumstances, the police decided to re-examine the people closest to her, as those responsible for such crimes are often found among acquaintances. The focus shifted to her best friend, Stacy. Although they had spoken to her briefly before, this time the interview lasted over 4 hours. From the start, Stacy expressed a strong willingness to help but firmly denied any involvement. She was cleared as a suspect when she provided a confirmed alibi. She had spent the entire weekend at her sister's house and they had been together the whole time, cooking side by side. The police are trying to ask Stacy if she knows about Angel's relationship with a man. Stacy revealed that Angel had recently become interested in a young man named Mark Sotka, a 19-year-old who had just graduated with honors from their high school. Stacy explained that Angel had been in love with Mark for a long time and even hoped to start a serious relationship with him. However, Angel was very private, especially about her relationships, and only Stacy knew about Mark, not even sharing it with her mother. During the questioning, Stacy reveals that Angel was aware of her pregnancy shortly before she disappeared. They had talked several times about the possibility of telling Mark about the baby, and Angel was optimistic that he would accept her and the child, viewing it as the start of their life together. Stacy was doubtful, but Angel was convinced she could build a family with Mark. The detectives decided to investigate Mark's background before confronting him. It appeared that Mark was not ready for fatherhood. Just before Angel went missing, he started college, which suggests he may have only considered Angel a short fling while planning to focus on his studies. They found no incriminating evidence against him, as he had a clean record and a solid reputation in school. Eventually, Mark was called to the police station for questioning. He was surprised to learn that he was considered a suspect in Angel's disappearance. He denied any involvement and refuted Stacy's claims about their relationship. When he learned that Angel might be pregnant, he laughed it off, dismissing it as a fabrication by his girlfriend. He admitted to having had a brief encounter with Angel at the beginning of summer but said they had not met again since then. Additionally, he had been in a relationship with another girl for 2 years. To support his claims, he needed to provide proof and a reliable alibi. Mark testified that he left work at 5 p.m. on July 31, 1992 to go to a shopping mall. He intended to buy a gift for his girlfriend and then meet friends at a pizzeria. The police began to investigate his account closely. His employment at a car dealership was verified through his timesheet, which matched his claimed working hours. Additionally, they found a receipt for the gift purchase. Several friends from work supported his story, confirming he was at the pizzeria until around 9 p.m. The only inconsistency was that some staff members at the places he visited that evening did not remember him. However, Mark willingly took a polygraph test, which showed no evidence of his involvement in any crime. As a result, he was cleared as a suspect. The investigation hit another dead end, prompting detectives to revisit earlier theories of escape or kidnapping. Discovering that Angel might have been pregnant reinforced these theories. Her family may have opposed her having a child at just 17, leading her to potentially run away to start a new life with the baby. Unfortunately, these possibilities did not bring them any closer to finding her. Frustrated by the lack of progress, Angel's mother decided to take action. She reached out to the community through local media in hopes of gathering information. Her appeal successfully raised awareness about Angel's disappearance, turning the incident into a well-known topic of discussion. Friends and concerned individuals joined in, distributing thousands of leaflets. Charities became involved, and a fund was established, raising $10,000 as a reward for anyone who could provide useful information for the investigation. In the following weeks, the police department received numerous requests for information, which opened several new leads for the investigation. Detectives conducted thorough checks, but these efforts did not yield any significant results. Frustrated, Angel's family made the decision to hire a private detective. When Angel's father returned from a trip, he was hopeful that it would help locate his daughter, unlike the ineffective efforts of the police. However, despite the detectives' hard work, no new information emerged. 3 months passed, and there were still no updates on Angel's case. By this time, her friends had almost lost hope, but her mother remained determined. Angel's mother, Jackie, even altered the message on their answering machine, leaving a note for her daughter in the hopes that she would eventually call. She refused to believe that anything bad had happened to Angel. Meanwhile, the entire city was critical of the police for their lack of progress, which led to increased pressure on law enforcement to revisit existing leads and suspects. Eventually, detectives began to focus on a man who was engaged to Angel's best friend. He was very interested in finding out what happened to her and was vocal in his criticism of the investigation. His name was Candle. Even though he showed a strong interest in Angel, he did not give any information to the detectives or the media. It was believed that he had attempted to start a relationship with Angel and was rejected, which might have led to her kidnapping or murder. On the day she went missing, he was working at a shoe store in the shopping mall where she was last seen. He had a confirmed alibi for that time, but after work, he could have committed a crime, especially since he was nearby. He allowed investigators to search his car, but nothing suspicious was found. The investigation had reached another dead end. On December 15, 1992, 4.5 months after Angel's disappearance, a local resident was out hunting with his dog. While walking through the forest, the dog became uneasy and led its owner away. This took them to a drainage ditch, where the hunter noticed something wrapped in a sheet and tied with a rope. Upon closer inspection, he saw a human hand protruding from the package. The man quickly contacted the police. When law enforcement arrived, they discovered a body in an advanced state of decomposition. Identification was possible only through dental records, which confirmed that it was 17-year-old Angel Ormston, who had been reported missing. On December 16th, Angel's family was informed of her death. An autopsy showed she had suffered blunt force trauma to the head, which might not have been fatal. However, she had sustained 2 stab wounds to the chest, both delivered with significant force, impacting her heart. As a result, she bled out quickly and died. Investigating her death was complicated by decomposition, but fibers resembling those from a blue carpet were found at the scene. The police compiled a list of all homes associated with Angel, including those of neighbors, family, and friends, in search of a home that might have green carpeting. One key location of interest was the house belonging to Mark, who might have been the father of Angel's unborn child. At the time of the murder, the house was empty as it was for sale. Witnesses claimed they saw Mark enter the house with a girl who matched Angel's description. Although the house had been sold by then, the new owners allowed detectives to inspect it. Most rooms had been renovated, except for the basement. Upon entering the basement, the police found a blue carpet that matched the fibers collected from the scene. Additionally, a clothesline similar to the one used by the killer to move the body was discovered in the laundry room, matching the one found on Angel. The new owners reported that both the carpet and the clothesline had been left behind by the previous owners. These items were sent for forensic analysis, and tests confirmed that the microscopic fibers and the rope matched those used in the crime. Furthermore, a bloody fingerprint was discovered in the basement. 5 months after Angel disappeared, on December 31, 1992, 19-year-old Mark Sotka was arrested on suspicion of murder. During his arrest, he insisted that the police had no evidence against him and claimed he was not the person they were looking for. He immediately refused to cooperate with detectives, prompting forensic experts to conduct a detailed examination of his car. They discovered that although he had attempted to clean the interior, a few small drops of blood remained. During questioning, Mark eventually broke down due to the overwhelming evidence against him. He admitted to committing an act he described as stupid. When pressed for more details, he confessed to murdering Angel. Mark explains that he invited Angel to his house for intimate relations again, but things changed that night when she revealed that she was pregnant and that he was the father. This news triggered a violent outburst from him. He demanded that she get an abortion, but she refused. An argument ensued, during which Angel threatened to cause problems. In a fit of rage, Mark struck her several times in the face. Angel fell in the garage, and Mark, grabbing a knife, returned to the basement and stabbed her twice in the chest. Afterward, he calmly met with his friends at a pizzeria, chatting and laughing as if nothing had happened. Later that evening, he wrapped her body in a sheet, secured it with a clothesline, and transported it in the trunk of his car to a wooded area, where he left it in a ditch. Afterward, Mark returned home, covered up the evidence of the crime, and cleaned his car. After 5 months of investigation, he was arrested as the killer. During questioning, Mark confessed to first-degree murder and led authorities to the location where he disposed of the knife used in the crime. Despite thorough searches, the knife was never found. However, he had limited chances of proving his innocence. The motive for the attack stemmed from Angel's pregnancy, which disrupted his future plans. Mark had no intention of continuing his relationship with her and wanted to focus on someone else. In February 1993, to avoid the death penalty that was in place at the time, Mark officially admitted his guilt. Consequently, he was sentenced to life in prison but became eligible for parole after 30 years. Angel's family pointed out that Mark showed no remorse or compassion, which explained how he was able to deceive the polygraph test. Following his sentencing, he was taken to jail. After serving 20 years, Mark utilized an old Ohio law that allowed him to request a parole hearing after 2/3 of his minimum sentence. His family was informed, and Angel's relatives increased their efforts to prevent him from being released. Their efforts were successful, and he was denied parole in July 2023. After serving 30 years, Mark appeared before the parole board again, but this time, Angel's family opposed his release once again. As a result, he remains in prison. Angel's family expressed their relief to the media, calling it a significant victory for them. Her mother stated that their family would continue to fight to keep the killer incarcerated and would never forgive Mark, who has never expressed remorse or sought forgiveness for taking Angel's life and the life of her baby. It was here in 1985 that Captain Gary Eastburn lived with his wife Catherine and their 3 daughters, about 10 minutes from the base where he served. Shortly before the events in question, Captain Gary received a promotion, which required him to undergo training at officer school. Consequently, he had to leave his family for a while, attending officer school in Montgomery, Alabama, for about 10 weeks. This was an important step, as the family was planning to move to England, where Gary could serve in the Royal Air Force. Gary had a strong marriage that lasted for 10 years, and they kept in touch while separated. However, on Saturday, May 11, 1985, Gary tried to call his wife several times, but to no avail. He took advantage of several breaks to call but never received an answer. Finally, he reached out to one of his friends who remained on Fort Bragg and asked him to check on his wife. The man did so, but when he knocked on the door, no one answered. He couldn't wait forever, so he simply left Catherine a note, asking her to call her husband back as soon as she could. While shining a flashlight and walking around the house, the friend accidentally woke up a neighbor named Bob Seafelt. When Gary called Bob, he mentioned that he had no idea what was going on with Catherine, but everything seemed strange. After a fitful night's sleep, Bob woke up the next day, with troubling thoughts swirling in his mind. He noticed that a stack of newspapers had piled up near the neighbor's door and realized he had last seen Catherine leave for the store on Thursday. Bob went to the neighbor's door and knocked, but no one answered. Listening closely, it seemed to Bob that he could hear a child crying inside. Knowing the family well, he assumed it was the youngest daughter, who was about 2 years old at the time. Concerned about the situation, Bob called the police at 12:53 p.m. and asked them to check on the family. When the patrolman arrived at the scene, they began the standard procedure and shone his flashlight through the windows. They saw the baby in a crib, appearing pale and emaciated. Despite the protocol the officer needed to follow, they instinctively felt that something alarming had occurred. A patrolman immediately cut through the window screen and entered the house. Upon entering, he saw the baby girl, who was alive but in dire condition. Later, authorities reported that a few more hours in that house could have been fatal for her. After handing the baby over to his partner, the patrolman returned inside the house, checking the rooms with his weapon drawn. In the main bedroom, he discovered the lifeless body of 3-year-old Erin Eastburn. A pillow covered the child's face, and it was apparent that her throat had been cut, with her head nearly severed from her body. She lay on the floor next to her parents' bed, where Catherine also lay. A pillow covered Catherine's face as well. When the officer removed it, he saw that her throat was cut, she was naked and had suffered multiple stab wounds, indicating she had been abused. The scene was horrifying, with blood everywhere. The patrolman ran outside, trying to catch his breath. When he was reminded that the family had 3 children, they still needed to find one more child who might be alive and in danger. He returned to the house, found Kara, but there were no signs of life. The 5-year-old had died in the same manner as her mother and sister. When the investigation began, detectives quickly noticed that a similar crime had occurred 15 years earlier involving a military family, the MacDonald family, who were killed in a similar fashion. This crime was committed by a military man, a husband and father named Jeffrey. Numerous coincidences were found in the handwriting of the criminals and the circumstances of these 2 murders, suggesting that they could have been committed by the same person. However, at the time of the massacre of the Eastburn family, Jeffrey MacDonald was already behind bars and could not have been involved in this crime. Rumors spread quickly, leading many to believe that Jeffrey MacDonald could have had an accomplice or an imitator. Forensic experts found blood all over the house, as well as clear traces of cleaning in some places, indicated by X stains of blood. It was obvious that the criminal had tried to clean up but left even more traces. Using luminol, investigators could see that the marks had been erased on the bathroom door handles. Likely, the perpetrator used a towel that had been thrown into the laundry basket. The crime was believed to have been committed between 8 p.m. on May 9 and 3 a.m. on May 10, 1985. As it turns out, the last person to see the family alive was the nanny, Julie. The young girl had been babysitting the youngest daughter for several days before their bodies were found and was automatically placed on the suspect list. Julie mentioned prank calls that Catherine had complained about before she was killed. Some man had been calling several times a day for 3 months, but it didn't particularly bother Catherine. She didn't feel any danger from these calls and never went to the police. Julie remembered another person with whom Catherine had been in contact, a certain Angela who was going to take the dog from the Eastburns, Dixie. Due to plans to move, they decided to give it away because there was no one to leave it with. According to the nanny, Catherine had left an ad in the newspaper, and after that, she received a call from Angela. Julie was curious about what happened next and unexpectedly shifted the focus back to the bloody crime of 15 years ago. She was worried that it could have been committed by a copycat of Jeffrey MacDonald and wanted to know what the police thought about it. The detective had no trouble getting the suspicious nanny to talk. She willingly shared her long friendship with Dr. MacDonald, believing that he was innocent. They had known each other for a long time and even exchanged letters for several years while he was in prison. When she was asked about her interest in the case, she was unable to justify his behavior, and the detective did not pay much attention to her words. When she confirmed her alibi, he simply removed her from the list of suspects. The police continued to work in the Eastburn house even after midnight, despite the late hour. A young man named Patrick Cohn approached them and decided to tell them about what he saw on the night of Friday, May 10, 1985, at about 3:30 a.m. He noticed a tall, fair-skinned man in jeans, a knitted hat, and a black jacket leaving Eastburn House. The man was carrying a garbage bag slung over his shoulder, got into his white Chevrolet Chevette, and drove away. Patrick's statement was taken seriously, and he was brought to the police station to help create a composite sketch. When the portrait was finished, there was a striking resemblance to a serviceman named Timothy Hennis. He was a 27-year-old man who, along with his younger brother and sister, had been adopted by the Hennis family, a couple who took all three of their children from an orphanage. They grew up in a fairly well-off family in Minnesota, which provided them with a bright future. Shortly before these tragic events, Tim married Angela in secret before Christmas in 1984. That same year, Tim's brother died in a motorcycle accident, so they opted for a modest celebration instead of a lavish ceremony. A couple of years later, they had a daughter, Christina. Tim admitted that he was familiar with the victim, Catherine, but there was a good reason for it. They decided to get dog for company, leading to the contact with the woman from the ad. Tim denied any involvement in the crime but mentioned a curious coincidence. He had arranged to meet Catherine on Tuesday, May 7th, just 3 days before the crime, to look at Dixie. When Tim first met the police, everyone was amazed because he looked exactly like the composite sketch. The police asked him to sign a waiver of Miranda rights, to which he agreed, provided he could be assured that he was not a suspect, which turned out to be a ruse. Timothy provided fingerprints, hair samples, saliva, and blood. He confirmed that he had indeed met Catherine that Tuesday and had taken her dog, after which they had not seen each other again. Timothy denied any involvement in the crime and provided a detailed account. Witness Patrick was called to identify him, and he pointed to Timothy. Despite Timothy's insistence that he had not been in the area early in the morning of May 10th, suspicions against him grew stronger due to his lack of an alibi. The police did not yet have an arrest warrant, so Timothy was released. However, after 7 hours, he was detained, officially charged with triple first-degree murder and abuse. Naturally, Timothy was not the only suspect. As is often the case, the police first considered the widower Gary Eastburn. When Gary was informed of the events, he remained surprisingly calm and simply asked if at least one family member had survived. When he learned that only the youngest daughter had survived, he broke down in tears. Gary had grown up as an ordinary young man. At the age of 12, his parents divorced, and his relationship with his stepfather did not work out. Despite this, he had a relatively calm childhood. He met Catherine in 1972, approximately 13 years before the tragedy. At that time, he was around 25 years old, having been born in 1947. Their daughter Kara was born in 1980. Gary decided to become a military man to support his growing family. When he finally returned to the city after the tragedy, he wanted to reach his surviving child. Instead, he was immediately taken to the police station for questioning, where they held him until about 2 a.m. Gary provided a reliable alibi. his blood and hair samples were taken before he was released. He was able to see his daughter late at night. She was in serious condition and did not even recognize him. Afterward, he went into their home to see what was missing. Gary had no idea who could have attacked his wife and children. They had no obvious enemies, but he remembered several prank calls that had started a few months before he left for training at officer school. The caller addressed Catherine by her first and last name, but no one paid attention to it at the time. Everyone thought it was just teenagers playing around, so no one raised the alarm. Now, in light of the tragic events, the calls seemed more suspicious. However, they could not be tracked due to a lack of technology at that time. After inspecting the house, the police reported that a metal safe containing important family documents was missing, along with $300 in cash that had been set aside for Christmas and Catherine's wallet with bank cards. This provided valuable clues. The ATM was identified, and it turned out that a transaction was made using Catherine's card. It was used shortly after the murders, including a transaction on May 11th. Detectives found a witness who provided a description of the man who came at night to withdraw cash, and this description exactly matched Timothy Hennis. In addition, she saw a white car belonging to Timothy. At this stage, the whole city already knew about the crime and the main suspect. Other witnesses also came forward. Timothy's neighbor saw him burning something in his backyard the day after the murder, likely getting rid of evidence. A local dry cleaner reported that Timothy had brought them a black jacket right after the crime. According to the description, it resembled the clothing that the witness Patrick had described. Timothy was questioned when his ex-wife said he had come to visit her that fateful night. His landlord mentioned that Timothy had not paid the rent for the house, which had accumulated over $300 in debt, but as soon as the eviction notice was served on May 10th, Timothy paid it off almost immediately. But where did he get the money so quickly? It seemed strange that the same amount disappeared from the home of the murdered family. Indirect evidence against Timothy was accumulating, but there was no irrefutable proof. By Christmas, it was decided to allow the suspect to post bail with the help of his relatives, and he managed to raise the funds. The reason for this leniency was the results of laboratory tests indicating that his biological materials did not match any evidence. Specifically, his blood type did not match. However, this could be attributed to the low accuracy of the testing methods used at that time. The prosecutor's office decided to turn to the only survivor of that bloody night, 2-year-old Jana. After the tragedy, the girl had not been able to come to her senses for a long time, but by February of the following year, she finally spoke. Gary was categorically against involving his daughter in the investigation, fearing that she would suffer further psychological trauma, but under pressure from the police, he ultimately agreed in order to seek justice for the victims. A special psychologist from North Carolina held 5 recorded conversations with Jana. During this time, she experienced several panic attacks and was still unable to recognize Timothy's photo. Based on the results of these sessions, it remained unclear whether there was one perpetrator or multiple criminals. Thus, the prosecutor's office decided to refuse to use Jana's testimony in the case. The trial was set for April 27, 1986. Timothy rejected the plea bargain offered by the prosecution. His lawyer wanted to change the location of the hearing but ultimately decided it would not make much difference. Instead, the defense focused on refuting the numerous circumstantial evidence on which the prosecution's case was based. The lawyer argued that the witness Patrick was lying when he claimed to have seen Timothy, described his appearance and car in such detail, especially since it had happened at night. He questioned how Patrick could have seen all of this in the dark. The lawyer discovered that the witness was going through a difficult time and had been pressured by the police. During numerous meetings with Timothy's lawyer, Patrick admitted that he might have made a mistake during the identification. The more he talked with the defense, the less certain he became about having seen Timothy on the street that night. On the day of the trial, the lawyer tried to get Patrick to admit that he had participated in the identification under pressure from detectives, but he did not. The defense discovered something even more significant. During the investigation, the police had gained access to the Fort Bragg duty log, which showed that Tim was on duty at the time of the crime, but this page mysteriously disappeared during the investigation. The lawyer believed that the detectives had intentionally torn out this page. Now, the defense attorney pressed this fact, interpreting the police's behavior as an attempt to convict an innocent person by destroying evidence of his innocence. Timothy's family was away at the time of the crime. The prosecution proposed a theory that Timothy had taken advantage of his wife's absence to start a romantic relationship with Catherine and visited her home on that fateful evening. However, Catherine rejected his advances, which angered him, leading him to kill her and her 2 children. The discussion then turned to the bank card. It was determined that the payment method had been used at 2:52 a.m. on May 11th when the defendant was on duty. Although this could not be confirmed, there was reasonable doubt that Timothy could have used it. Even though there was still no confirmed alibi for the night of the crime, the lawyers systematically managed to destroy the majority of the prosecution's arguments and raised doubts among the jury in order to convince them of Timothy's innocence. The prosecution presented frightening photographs from the crime scene and autopsies of the victims, about 100 photographs, which were included in a slideshow that lasted more than an hour. The tension in the courtroom was palpable. Despite the defense attorney's desperate attempts to convince the jury of the defendant's innocence, on July 4, 1986, Timothy Hennis was found guilty on all counts. The defense attorney believed that the main reason for this verdict was their failure to insist on a change of venue. He felt that his job was not finished since Timothy was sentenced to death, so he focused on saving his client's life. Interestingly, just a few days after starting his sentence, Timothy received a postcard in prison signed by Mr. X. In it, a mysterious stranger claimed responsibility for killing Timothy's family and apologized for Timothy serving time for his crimes. Mr. X admitted that he had left North Carolina and had no intention of returning. Timothy informed his lawyer about the postcard. Later, it was used at the retrial, but at the time of its receipt, the prosecutor dismissed it as a forgery. During this period, Timothy's parents rallied around him. Despite their divorce, they made every effort to save enough money to pay for his defense. The Supreme Court of North Carolina was approached, and the lawyers cited bias, arguing that the jury had been provoked by the photographs. The defense insisted that nearly 100 gruesome images from the massacre were guaranteed to elicit a negative reaction from the jury. Despite the lack of irrefutable evidence against Timothy, it came to light that several detectives who led the case were nearing retirement. The lawyers believed they simply did not want to leave behind an unsolved crime of such magnitude and were seeking a scapegoat, which they considered Timothy Hennis to be. The defense successfully secured a change of venue to Wilmington, a coastal town located 100 kilometers from Fayetteville. The new prosecutor agreed to this change without hesitation, confident in the prosecution's tactics, but the defense was well prepared and closed all loopholes except for one. There was still no reliable confirmation of the defendant's whereabouts on the night of the murder. The defense aimed to discredit the prosecution's main witness, Patrick, in court. During the interval between the first and second trials, Patrick had committed several minor offenses, including driving without a license. When stopped by the authorities, he advised them to contact the district attorney since he was a witness in the Timothy case. The lawyers believed this statement practically indicated that he had received a bribe from the very beginning. More thorough examinations of the collected evidence refuted the case against Timothy. The shoe prints found inside the house were 3 sizes smaller than his. There was blood on a towel in the bathroom, as well as other traces that did not match his profile. The defense presented a black jacket to the judge that was tested for bloodstains. Even the hair found on Catherine's body did not belong to Timothy. In this context, the numerous circumstantial pieces of evidence that the prosecutor's office had used in the first trial appeared less convincing during the retrial. The prosecution attempted to challenge all the defense's arguments with their own versions, but none of this was compelling in light of the thorough preparation from the defense. 2 days later, the jury found Timothy not guilty on all counts. It is noteworthy that during this hearing, only a few photographs from the crime scene were shown, as opposed to the 100 images in a lengthy slideshow during the first trial. 3 years later, Timothy was released from death row. He re-enlisted in military service, served in Saudi Arabia and Somalia, and then returned to the United States. In 1998, Timothy and his family settled in Fort Lewis, Washington. In 2004, he retired from the Army and took a job at a waste processing plant. He also became a Boy Scout leader. Meanwhile, widower Gary followed his plan and moved with his surviving daughter to the UK. In 2009, he served in the Royal Air Force, after which he married a nurse. In 2009, after leaving the Air Force, Gary returned to the US and settled in Washington. Subsequently, legislation was amended to prohibit retrials for individuals already convicted twice of the same crime. Disagreements arose on the basis that during the first trial, Timothy was in military service, thereby placing him under a different jurisdiction. This left the state in limbo, although it did not exclude the possibility that he could be brought to retrial. Despite such situations being rare in the state's judicial practice, they did not return to the case for almost 20 years. It seemed that life was improving, but the case of the triple murder remained unsolved. Finally, in 2006, a detective investigating particularly brutal murders decided to test the DNA materials collected from the body of Catherine. However, the only information the laboratory could provide at that time was that the collected samples belonged to a light-skinned individual. By 2010, the laboratory in North Carolina became embroiled in a significant scandal. It turned out that over the past decade and a half, the state crime lab systematically concealed or manipulated evidence to ensure convictions. This was revealed in at least 230 cases, 10 of which resulted in the wrongful conviction of innocent people sentenced to death. 3 of them even received lethal injections and were deprived of life. The DNA in the Eastburn case was retested, and the examination showed that the materials from the crime scene in the archive matched those of Timothy Hennis. In light of such convincing evidence, his trial was reopened for the 3rd time. Timothy hired the best military lawyer named Frank Spinner to lead his defense team. The lawyer attempted to tarnish the reputation of the victim, Catherine, by alleging that she was promiscuous with Timothy, hinting that that was why his DNA might have turned up in her home. Timothy argued that she was unfaithful to him and that the real killer was an individual named Mr. X, who had written a postcard to him while he was in prison. This attempt had the opposite effect. The prosecutor's office pointed out the obvious lie, as Timothy had previously denied any intimate contact with Catherine. He later claimed that he initially did not disclose the affair due to fear of exposure. Despite a fierce struggle for Timothy's freedom, the chosen tactics now appeared unconvincing. On April 15, 2010, a jury recommended that Hennis be sentenced to death. In addition, he was demoted to Private E1, stripped of all pay and allowances, dishonorably discharged from the United States Army. Hennis was incarcerated at the United States Disciplinary Barracks at Fort Leavenworth in Kansas, where he remains to this day. All his subsequent appeals were rejected. Under U.S. legislation, without the president's approval, they cannot execute him. Therefore, the likelihood that he will be deprived of life is low. The U.S. military has not executed anyone from its ranks since 1961. Interestingly, in 1985, when the murders of the Eastburn family occurred, a 20-year-old woman from Rochester, Minnesota, where Tim had lived for a long time, contacted the police to share her story. Upon hearing about the triple murder in North Carolina, she revealed that at the age of 11, she had been abused by Timothy Hennis. Unfortunately, due to a data error, she was not permitted to testify. Had she been allowed to do so, the outcome of the second trial, when he was acquitted, could have been entirely different, and he would most likely have been found guilty again. Even now, this trial raises more questions than answers. The story of the nanny, who cared for the Eastburn children, also raises many questions. Julie was addicted, and there were witnesses who heard her confess to the crime. Additionally, her unhealthy obsession with Jeffrey MacDonald, with whom she even corresponded, raises further doubts. Some supporters of Timothy believe that it was Julie who could have imitated her idol and killed the family with whom she worked. Katrina Wright's Brow was originally from Germany. There, she met an American serviceman named Charles, and they fell in love and got married. After their wedding, Charles brought Katrina to the United States, where they settled in a small town called Ayer, Massachusetts, which had around 5,000 residents. Together, they had 2 children, a son and a daughter. After leaving the military, Charles worked at a local factory that made knives and surgical instruments, providing for the family while Katrina stayed at home as a housewife. Katrina and Charles enjoyed a long life together filled with happy moments. As their children grew up and started their own lives, Katrina remained active, social, and energetic. When her children visited on weekends, she joyfully danced and had fun with her daughter. It was often hard to find her at home. In contrast, Charles was quiet, reserved, and calm. In 1980, Katrina was on the verge of realizing her long-held dream. She wanted to return to Germany to see how her home country had changed and to visit relatives and friends with whom she had kept in touch through letters over the years. To make this trip possible, she saved money for a long time but was so anxious about the possibility of her savings being stolen that she carried a large amount of cash in an envelope with her everywhere she went. This included outings to local restaurants with friends and family. When they learned about her money-carrying habit, they were surprised and often questioned her reasoning. It seemed odd to them that Katrina wasn't afraid to walk around with so much cash, especially since it posed a risk to her safety. However, Katrina believed that leaving the money at home unattended was even riskier. She felt that if she kept cash, her travel savings would be safe. At 48 years old, she truly thought her concerns were unfounded, at least until May 21, 1980. On that day, as usual, Charles left for work around 7 a.m., while Katrina stayed home a bit longer before heading to her job. However, by 10 a.m., her colleagues began to worry because she had not arrived at work. This was unusual for her. They attempted to call her, but she didn't answer. They also couldn't reach Charles, as he was out of contact during his shift, and mobile phones had not yet been invented. To save time, her colleagues began contacting the couple's closest relatives whose phone numbers they had. They were able to reach the daughter-in-law who lived next door to Katrina. She agreed to check on Katrina. At 10:45, she went to the address. She knocked on the door and windows several times, but there was no response. Her calls went unanswered, and the windows were tightly covered. When she tried to get inside, she found the front door was unlocked. As soon as she opened the door, it was clear that a struggle had occurred in the house. In the kitchen, she found Katrina lying on the floor, bleeding and unresponsive. The room showed signs of a violent confrontation, with furniture, appliances, and books scattered all around. The sink was soaked with water and blood, creating a horrifying scene. The daughter-in-law immediately called 911 for help, hoping that Katrina could be saved. However, she was too scared to remain in the house and waited for emergency responders outside. Paramedics quickly arrived at the house but were unable to save Katrina, who had already died. Detectives were immediately on the scene to investigate the crime. It became clear that the likely killer knew Katrina, as evidenced by the violence of the attack and the fact that the windows and locks were undamaged. This suggested that Katrina either let the attacker in willingly or he had a key. The assault took place in the kitchen, where the attacker used water to wash something in the sink, likely his hands or face. The kitchen remained messy, with blood and water splattered around. A faint fingerprint was discovered on the screen, while a clearer print was found on a toaster lying on the floor. Additionally, several hairs were found clutched in Katrina's fist, likely pulled from the attacker during a struggle. Unfortunately, DNA analysis techniques were still in their infancy at that time, so investigators could only collect and store the evidence for future analysis. Forensic scientists focused on the fingerprints they found. An expert determined that Katrina had been attacked multiple times. The suspected murder weapon, a paring knife, was discovered in the trash under the sink. The murder occurred in the kitchen, and it was clear that the house had been ransacked. The victim, Katrina, had her jewelry stolen, along with an envelope containing money she had saved for a trip back to her homeland. Initially, law enforcement believed the motive behind the crime was the stolen money. However, Katrina was determined to keep her savings, which led her to fight back against the robber, resulting in her tragic death. The numerous stab wounds also suggested a possible personal motive. Investigators looked into Katrina's personal life but found no one who could commit such a violent act. She did not have any obvious enemies and was not vocal about having money in her home, with only her closest friends knowing about her savings. This limited circle led them to suspect her husband, Charles. They theorized that the murder might have taken place before he left for work around 7 a.m. Evidence linked the murder weapon, a knife, to Charles, as it was produced by the company where he worked. He acknowledged that this knife was often used in their kitchen. While many residents owned similar knives, the knife in question had been thoroughly cleaned, which raised suspicions. During the interrogation, Charles expressed deep sorrow over his wife's death. He had been married to her for decades and appeared genuinely grief-stricken. Still, the fact that the perpetrator used a kitchen knife instead of a premeditated weapon was unusual for such a crime. Despite his apparent distress, Charles was subjected to a polygraph test, which he passed. In addition to the numerous stab wounds, Katrina had suffered a blow to the head from a blunt object, likely a lamp found broken near her body in the kitchen. Ultimately, with the collection of fingerprints and blood samples from the scene and after questioning Charles, the police decided to send him home. From the beginning, he was hesitant to go home because it reminded him of the tragedy. In 1980, there were no specialized companies for crime scene cleanup, so he had to rely on his relatives for assistance. Consequently, Katrina's daughter and daughter-in-law ended up cleaning the kitchen and removing blood from various surfaces. They also expressed their concerns to the authorities, who believed that Katrina's attacker might have been someone she knew personally. To understand what happened, they explored various possibilities. During their conversations, they recalled a 25-year-old man named Kenneth Walters. Born on August 16, 1953, Kenneth was 26 at the time of the crime. He comes from a large, troubled family. He lives near Katrina, and some of his relatives are facing legal troubles. Kenneth himself had a history of minor criminal offenses. Before reaching adulthood, he had been arrested for participating in a knife fight. Since it was his first offense, he received a fine and was required to perform community service. A few weeks prior to Katrina's death, Kenneth had attacked law enforcement officers. Although a trial was scheduled for the day she was murdered, he was released on bail beforehand. Kenneth worked as a cook at a restaurant that Katrina frequently visited to spend time with her friends and family. While she did not interact with him directly, he might have learned about her possessing a large sum of money, possibly by overhearing her conversations during his shifts. Katrina's daughter and daughter-in-law informed the police of their suspicions regarding him. Law enforcement officers decided to investigate Kenneth as a potential suspect in the murder. They spoke with him, but he denied any involvement and did not show any typical signs of a murderer. However, his previous involvement in a knife fight raised suspicions against him. When the police interviewed Kenneth again, he provided a solid alibi, supported by documentation. He had a time card that clearly indicated the hours he worked at the restaurant, which confirmed his statement. His colleagues, who were on duty with him that night, also verified his alibi. Kenneth explained that he left home the night before at 10 p.m., worked the night shift, and did not leave the restaurant until around 9 a.m. the next morning. A friend drove him back home, where his girlfriend could also confirm his presence. He did not stay long at home. He quickly changed clothes, took a shower, and left. By 10 a.m., he was attending a court hearing related to an incident involving a police officer. Given his tight schedule, he simply did not have the opportunity to commit the crime before his court appearance. Kenneth dressed neatly and left for court, where he remained until 11 a.m. Afterward, he returned to the restaurant and stayed there until 12:30 p.m. When he got home, he encountered the police, who were canvassing the neighborhood. They spoke with him, examined his clothes and body for any blood or scratches, finding none, which did not raise any suspicion. A forensic expert determined that the murder occurred around 7 a.m., likely soon after her husband Charles left for work. Detectives believed the crime could have taken place between 7 and 10:45 a.m., when the body was discovered. Given the limited time Kenneth had before the trial, it seemed unlikely that he could have committed the crime and escaped unnoticed. After verifying Kenneth's alibi, he was removed from the list of suspects due to a lack of evidence of criminal activity. However, investigators did not completely rule him out of the investigation as the case progressed, though they did not find any new evidence. Fingerprints retrieved from the crime scene did not match any in existing databases, which were not very advanced at that time. The investigation stalled for 2 years with little to no progress. During this time, a man named Robert Osborne contacted the police, claiming he had important information regarding Catherine's murder. However, he expected to receive a reward for his testimony. Detectives indicated that a reward could only be offered to someone providing valuable information that led to an arrest. Robert suggested that law enforcement should interview Kenneth's ex-girlfriend, Brenda Marsh. At the time of the call, Robert was dating Brenda and was familiar with Kenneth's situation. He claimed that Kenneth had confessed to the murder during a private conversation. By the time the police received this tip, Brenda had already broken up with Kenneth, who was living elsewhere. Brenda confirmed that at the time of Katrina's murder, she and Kenneth were living together. She described Kenneth as rude and cruel. Brenda had a daughter with him, and they were struggling financially. Following the advice of Robert, her new boyfriend, she decided to turn Kenneth in, hoping to receive a reward that would help her situation. According to Brenda, on the evening of May 20th, 1980, Kenneth left their home around 10 p.m. to go to work at a restaurant. However, when they called the restaurant later, they found out that Kenneth had not arrived there at the expected time. Brenda was uncertain about what time Kenneth returned home or whether he had gone to the restaurant at all. The next morning, he came back with a deep, fresh scratch on his face that was still bleeding. When Brenda asked him about it, he replied that it was none of her business. He quickly changed his clothes, took a shower, and left for a court appointment. When Kenneth returned from court regarding an assault case, Brenda informed him that the police were already investigating at their home. Kenneth was very upset about this and told Brenda that if the police asked her about him, she should say he hadn't lived there for about a month. After the investigation stalled, they relocated and waited a bit to avoid drawing attention to their escape. Brenda attempted to inquire about the incident with Kenneth, but he brushed off her concerns, stating that it was none of her business. However, one night, while drunk, he revealed that he had interacted with a German woman to take her money. Kenneth's testimony was contradicted by his time card, which showed he arrived at work on time and left only at 9 a.m. Brenda's statements also conflicted with the fact that Kenneth spoke to the police when he returned home and had no visible scratches on his face. Brenda's suspicions seemed unfounded. She could simply be a scorned ex seeking revenge on Kenneth. To clarify the situation, she was offered a polygraph test, which she took and passed. The detectives then decided to conduct a further investigation into Kenneth's background. They found another ex-girlfriend who claimed that Kenneth had also confessed to murdering a German woman, whom he referred to casually. Despite this new testimony, there was still little evidence against him. The fingerprints found on the toaster and faucet in the kitchen where Katrina died did not match Kenneth. This investigation took place in 1982, before DNA testing was available. To eliminate any doubts, they compared Kenneth's blood type with the blood found at the scene, and they matched it. The detectives viewed this as solid evidence of Kenneth's guilt, despite the low accuracy of such comparisons. It appeared that the prosecutor was eager to close the case quickly and needed someone to blame. Given the personal nature of the crime and its brutality, the police decided to thoroughly search for a possible motive. Kenneth had a difficult childhood that significantly shaped his life. He harbored a long-standing dislike for Katrina, feeling resentful towards her and her children. They all grew up together, and Katrina's children often boasted about their pocket money, which upset Kenneth because his family struggled financially. One day, driven by frustration, Kenneth and his sister broke into Katrina's house, stealing sweets and money from her children's piggy bank. At that time, Kenneth was only 10 years old. Katrina was understandably furious and insisted on taking action against him for his unacceptable behavior. Then, Kenneth was taken from his family and placed in a juvenile correctional facility at age 10. There, he faced harsh conditions alongside older teens who had committed more serious offenses. Kenneth found this experience traumatic and rarely spoke about it, yet he held a deep resentment towards Katrina for her role in his imprisonment. Despite the hostility he faced from others, his sister, Betty Ann, supported him. Although she was younger, Betty was very close to Kenneth and always believed he was innocent. Despite Betty's support, Kenneth was arrested 2 years after Katrina's tragic death and charged with her murder. The hearing was set for 1983. Kenneth remained calm about the upcoming trial, confident in his alibi, which was supported by a timesheet. However, from the very beginning, the odds were stacked against him. His former girlfriend, Brenda, testified against him, sharing even more information than before. She claimed to have been in close contact with a friend of Katrina's who had previously dated Kenneth. Catherine's friend stated that Kenneth had given her a ring a few months after Catherine's death. Upon seeing the ring, Brenda realized it resembled one she had seen on Katrina before the murder. Photos of the ring were presented as evidence during the trial. The prosecution utilized clever tactics and presented various pieces of circumstantial evidence. Kenneth's lawyer believed he had a good chance of avoiding a conviction and advised him not to testify in his own defense. However, when it was time to present evidence of Kenneth's innocence, the timesheet had mysteriously disappeared. Without it, and relying only on his family's claims that he was a good person, there was no substantial proof to support his innocence. Consequently, Kenneth Walters was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The defense argued that Kenneth was fortunate that the state did not have the death penalty, otherwise, he would have faced execution. Kenneth maintained his innocence and requested a retrial, but only his sister Betty supported him. Others believed she was too emotionally attached and forgave him for his past mistakes. His history of wrongdoings influenced the jury's decision against him. Initially, his lawyer believed in his innocence and worked diligently to exonerate him. However, all appeals were denied. As time passed, the lawyer's enthusiasm dwindled. Kenneth lost the opportunity to have his case reconsidered and was left to serve a life sentence in prison. His family believed his imprisonment was due to his lack of financial resources. He could not afford a skilled lawyer. After all his appeals were turned down, no attorney wanted to take on his case. Kenneth accepted his fate, but Betty remained determined. She frequently visited him in prison and continued to believe in his innocence, steadfastly pursuing justice on his behalf. Kenneth had a difficult personality and frequently caused problems in prison, which made it hard for anyone to make excuses for his behavior. He even tried to end his life out of despair. During one visit, Betty was unable to see him because he was in solitary confinement after getting into a fight with another inmate. Once he was released from solitary, they were able to meet, and Betty had a heartfelt conversation with him, expressing her determination to help him get out of prison. Their trust in lawyers had faded, especially since many refused to take on Kenneth's case. Betty felt she could only rely on herself. At that time, she hadn't completed high school and lacked the necessary education. She had also divorced her husband, who had discouraged her from helping Kenneth. As a single mother of 2, she worked as a waitress, struggling to support herself and her children, but she remained committed to helping Kenneth. Betty first focused on finishing high school and then enrolled in college. She managed to balance her night shifts as a waitress while raising her kids. Despite the challenges, her determination and strong feelings propelled her forward. Betty eventually became a lawyer, fully knowledgeable about Kenneth's case but puzzled about how his timesheet went missing. Additionally, she discovered that Brenda, who reported a large scratch on Kenneth's face the day Katrina was murdered, had lied, as Kenneth had been in court, then at a restaurant, and later speaking with detectives. Those reports did not mention any injuries on Kenneth. It was odd that no one else noticed the scratch. Detectives typically pay close attention to such details, especially since Kenneth was one of the suspects from the beginning. Betty continuously reviewed the evidence and found substantial confirmation of her suspicions. Furthermore, she learned that Brenda did not actually take a polygraph test. Instead, Brenda only passed a voice test, which can indicate lies but is less reliable than a polygraph. Kenneth successfully passed the lie detector test, which should have worked in his favor, but this detail was not mentioned during the trial. As Betty investigated the circumstances surrounding Kenneth's conviction, she increasingly realized that law enforcement had seemingly chosen him as a scapegoat. Brenda went to the police after realizing that Kenneth had received a life sentence and admitted that she had lied under pressure from Robert, who hoped to gain financially. She also desired revenge on her ex, Kenneth, and felt pressured by the police. Now, she regretted that her actions had led to an innocent man being imprisoned for life. Another ex-girlfriend also revealed that she testified against Kenneth due to pressure from a female police officer who had a personal bias against him and was intent on seeing him convicted. It wasn't until 1999 that Betty gained access to significant evidence, specifically DNA samples collected from the crime scene. She uncovered a box of documents and samples, including blood and hair, that had never been analyzed before. The examination revealed that the DNA from the crime scene did not match Kenneth's. However, both law enforcement and the public worked to prevent the case from being reopened, while Katrina's family strongly resisted any new investigation. In 2000, Betty successfully reached out to the Innocence Project, a group of lawyers dedicated to assisting wrongfully convicted individuals. This organization had a team of experts and the resources needed to conduct thorough investigations. Betty presented evidence proving Kenneth's innocence, convincing the project to take on his case. She also contacted a female police officer involved in the investigation, who had a questionable reputation and had previously compromised her credibility in another case. Many in law enforcement spoke poorly of her, raising suspicions that she had intentionally framed Kenneth and had not lost key evidence by chance. Furthermore, inconsistencies in the testimonies of Kenneth's former girlfriends were exposed, particularly regarding a ring that was shown to the jury. It was discovered that the ring had been sent to Germany and did not match the jewelry owned by Kenneth's ex-girlfriend. It was smaller and unsuitable for Katrina. Betty sought to find the ring to counter another piece of evidence against Kenneth. She learned that the ring had initials engraved on it that did not belong to Katrina. Ultimately, due to Betty's extensive efforts in uncovering these discrepancies, the case was reopened, and the prosecutor dropped the charges against Kenneth. After spending 18 years, 5 months, and 10 days in prison, Kenneth was finally acquitted and became a free man. He was able to enjoy life again after being deprived of it for so long. Unfortunately, tragedy struck. On September 19, 2001, while visiting his brother's house, Kenneth decided to take a shortcut that required him to climb over a tall wall. He did not realize the wall on the other side was even higher. When he jumped from a height of 15 feet, he fell awkwardly, struck his head, and later died in the hospital. Betty, Kenneth's sister, remembered that those 6 months after his release were the happiest of his life. After so many years in prison, everything felt new to him. Even after his death, Betty continued to fight for justice. In 2004, she filed a lawsuit against the city for the wrongful imprisonment of Kenneth and the impact it had on their lives. By 2009, she successfully won the case, receiving $10.5 million in compensation. In this story, Katrina's murder case remains unsolved and often forgotten. The blood found at the crime scene was tested, but no matches were found in the police database. The identity of the person who brutally took her life remains unknown. Her family hopes that one day, the case will be solved,